Bleeding Pharma. CEO trembles when dead lover returns as janitor who still loves him. Julian Brennan collapsed against his penthouse office door, blood seeping through his white shirt as pain tore through his abdomen. Through blurring vision, he saw the night janitor rushing toward him, and his world stopped. Those eyes, that face, Rhea, the woman he'd mourned for 8 years, the woman his mother swore had died in that car accident. She was alive, and she was reaching for him with hands that still trembled the same way they had the last time they'd touched. The pain in Julian's gut became secondary to the impossibility unfolding before him. He tried to speak, but only managed a choked sound as her hands, warm, real, undeniably solid, pressed against his wound. Her voice, the one that had haunted every quiet moment for nearly a decade, cut through the fog of agony. "Julian, stay with me. I need you to breathe. Can you hear me? Just breathe." He must be hallucinating. Blood loss did that, didn't it? Created visions of the deepest desires, the most aching losses. But hallucinations didn't have calluses on their palms from hard labor. They didn't smell like industrial cleaner mixed with the faint ghost of jasmine perfume. They didn't radiate body heat that he could feel even through the ice spreading through his veins. "You're dead," he whispered, the words scraping his throat raw. "I buried you." Something flickered across her face. Grief, guilt, fear, all compressed into a single expression. Her hands pressed harder against his wound, and he hissed at the pressure. The pain confirmed what his mind refused to accept. This was real. She was real. "I know what she told you," Rhea said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "But right now, I need you to stay conscious. Can you do that for me?" The janitor's uniform she wore had Kingsley stitched above the breast pocket. Not Baptiste. Not the name he'd whispered into darkness for 8 years, the name carved on a headstone he'd visited every week until the visits became monthly, then yearly. Then only on the anniversary of the day his mother told him she was gone. Rhea fumbled for her phone with one hand, the other maintaining pressure on his abdomen. Her fingers were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the screen. Julian watched her face, older now, with fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a wariness that made her seem both harder and more fragile than the woman he remembered. "I need an ambulance at Brennan Tower, penthouse level. Medical emergency, internal bleeding. Patient is conscious but deteriorating." She rattled off details with surprising medical knowledge, her voice taking on an authoritative tone that didn't match the humble uniform she wore. As she spoke to the dispatcher, memories crashed through Julian's consciousness with the force of physical blows. Rhea, at 24, laughing in his father's laboratory at 2 in on the morning, her natural hair pulled back in a messy bun, safety goggles perched on her head as she explained her theory about protein synthesis in a way that made him fall in love with both her mind and the animation in her face. Her hands, those same hands now covered in his blood, threading through his hair as they celebrated their first successful trial result with champagne and kisses that tasted like promise. His mother's office, all ice and expensive furniture. Tori Brennan's voice, cold and absolute. "I'm sorry, Julian. The accident was sudden. She died on impact. They said she didn't suffer." The closed casket funeral he'd attended alone, his mother's hand on his shoulder, feeling more like a restraint than comfort. The way she'd watched him with something that looked almost like satisfaction as he stood in the rain, unable to cry because the loss was too enormous to process. "Julian," Rhea's voice pulled him back to the present. "Look at me. Stay here." He focused on her face, cataloging every change. Her cheekbones were more prominent now, her face leaner in a way that spoke of missed meals and hard years. But her eyes, those warm brown eyes that used to light up when she looked at him, held depths of sorrow he didn't remember. "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why did you let me think?" "Not now," she interrupted, her professional mask cracking to reveal something raw beneath. "Right now you need to focus on staying alive. We can deal with ghosts later." The elevator chimed and Julian heard running footsteps. Building security appeared first, followed closely by someone whose expensive shoes clicked authoritatively on the marble floor. Julian didn't need to look to know who it was. Trey Locke had a distinctive presence, all calculated ambition and barely concealed predatory instinct. "What the hell happened?" Trey demanded, his eyes taking in the scene with sharp assessment. Julian collapsed and bleeding, being tended by a janitor whose hands were stained red. "Internal bleeding," Rhea answered without looking up. "The ambulance is on its way. He needs to keep pressure on the wound and stay calm." "Who are you?" Trey's question was sharp with suspicion. Before Rhea could answer, Julian's hand shot out, catching her wrist with surprising strength. His fingers wrapped around her pulse point, feeling her heart hammering against his touch. Real. Alive. Here. "Don't leave," he managed. The words came out as command and plea combined. "Don't disappear again." Her eyes met his, and in them he saw a war being fought. Every instinct she had was clearly screaming at her to run, to retreat back into whatever invisibility had kept her hidden for 8 years. But his grip on her wrist tightened, and something in her expression shifted, resignation mixed with something that looked almost like relief. "I won't," she promised softly. "I'm here." The paramedics arrived in a controlled rush of equipment and efficient questions. They worked quickly, establishing an IV line, checking vitals, preparing to transport. Through it all, Julian refused to release Rhea's wrist. When they tried to load him onto the gurney, he held fast, forcing them to work around his grip. "Sir, we need to get you to the hospital," one paramedic said with professional patience. "Your blood pressure is dropping." "She comes with me," Julian said. It wasn't a request. Trey stepped forward, his expression calculating. "Julian, that's a member of the janitorial staff. I'm sure she has other responsibilities. She comes with me." Julian's voice carried the steel that had built Brennan Pharmaceuticals into a billion-dollar empire. Even bleeding and horizontal, he commanded absolute authority. The paramedics looked at Rhea, who nodded once. They wheeled Julian toward the elevator with Rhea walking beside the gurney, his hand still locked around her wrist like an anchor to reality. Trey followed them into the elevator, his phone already in his hand. "I'm calling Tori," he announced. "She'll want to know about this." At the mention of his mother's name, Julian felt Rhea stiffen. Her pulse jumped beneath his fingers, fear radiating through that small point of contact. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance was the confirmation of what he'd suspected since seeing her alive. His mother had lied about more than just the accident. The ambulance ride passed in a blur of pain and medication. Julian fought to stay conscious, afraid that if he closed his eyes, Rhea would vanish like smoke. She sat beside him, her wrist still caught in his grip, speaking quietly to the paramedics about his symptoms with a medical vocabulary that seemed at odds with her current employment. "How do you know all this?" one paramedic asked curiously. Rhea's answer was carefully neutral. "I used to work in healthcare." The lie of omission cut through Julian's pain-fogged mind. She hadn't worked in healthcare. She'd been pursuing her doctorate in biochemistry, 3 semesters from completion when she'd disappeared. She'd been brilliant, innovative, destined for breakthrough research that would save thousands of lives, and now she was scrubbing floors and pretending she'd been a nurse. What had happened to her in those 8 years? The hospital emergency department was organized chaos. Doctors descended immediately, asking rapid-fire questions, while nurses hooked Julian to monitors. He heard terms like perforated ulcer and internal hemorrhaging and possible surgery floating around him. Through it all, his hand remained locked on Rhea's wrist. A doctor, young, efficient, clearly the trauma-led, turned to Rhea. "Are you family?" She hesitated, and Julian felt that hesitation like a knife wound. She's with me," Julian interrupted. "She stays." The doctor looked skeptical but nodded. "Fine, but you'll need to step back while we examine him." Julian finally released her wrist, but his eyes tracked her every movement as she backed toward the wall. A nurse began cutting away his blood-soaked shirt, and he heard Rhea's sharp intake of breath. He knew what she was seeing, a body that had changed dramatically from the one she'd known. He'd lost weight in the past year, stress stealing his appetite. New scars marked his torso from a car accident 18 months ago. He'd been driving too fast, too recklessly, not really caring if he made it home. The doctor probed his abdomen, and Julian grunted at the pain. "How long have you been experiencing symptoms?" she asked. "Months," he admitted. "Maybe a year." "And you didn't seek treatment?" The doctor's tone carried professional frustration. Julian's eyes found Rhea again. I didn't think I had anything worth staying healthy for. The words landed with devastating honesty. Rhea's face crumpled for just a moment before she regained control, but he'd seen it. The guilt, the anguish, the understanding that his slow self-destruction had been, in part, about losing her. The examination continued, but Julian's attention was split between the medical team's ministrations and Rhea's presence against the wall. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, a defensive posture he'd never seen from her before. The confident, joyful woman he'd known had been replaced by someone who'd learned to make herself small, to disappear into backgrounds. A commotion outside the exam room announced new arrivals. Julian recognized his mother's voice before she appeared, and he saw Rhea's entire body go rigid. She took an involuntary step backward, pressing herself into the corner as if she could merge with the wall. Tori Brennan swept into the room with the force of a cold front, designer clothes immaculate, platinum hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. Angela Price followed in her wake, Julian's fiancée, elegant and appropriate in every way his mother deemed important. "Julian, darling, what happened?" Tori's concern sounded genuine to anyone who didn't know her well. Julian heard the calculation beneath it. Her eyes swept the room, cataloging details, and stopped on Rhea. For one fraction of a second, Tori's mask slipped. Her face went absolutely white, eyes widening in shock that she quickly masked with contempt. But Julian had seen it. The moment his mother realized that the woman she'd paid to disappear, the woman she'd convinced him was dead, stood alive and breathing in this emergency room. "You," Tori said, the single word dripping with venom. "What are you doing here?" Rhea lifted her chin, showing the first spark of defiance Julian had seen since their reunion. "My job. I work in his building. As a janitor." Tori made the occupation sound obscene. How appropriate. "Mother." Julian's voice cut through the tension. "Don't." Angela stepped forward, her expression confused but sympathetic. "Tori, who is this woman? Do you know her?" "Nobody important," Tori said dismissively, already reaching for her phone. "Security. Can escort her out." "She stays." Julian's voice was weak but absolute. "Or I leave. Your choice." The trauma doctor intervened, her patients clearly exhausted. "Everyone except family needs to wait outside. We need to determine if this patient requires emergency surgery." Tori moved to Julian's side, automatically assuming her position. Angela followed, looking genuinely worried despite their emotionally hollow engagement. The doctor gestured for Rhea to leave, and Julian saw the relief and resignation war in her expression. But before she could move, Julian spoke. "She's family, more than anyone else in this room." The silence that followed was electric. Tori's face transformed into something cold and furious. Angela's eyes widened with understanding. The medical staff looked uncomfortable, clearly wanting to avoid family drama while dealing with medical crisis. "Julian," Tori began, her voice tight with controlled rage. "8 years ago you told me she died in a car accident," Julian interrupted, his words deliberate despite the pain. "You let me grieve. You let me attend a funeral for an empty casket. You let me destroy myself thinking I'd lost the only woman I'd ever loved." He paused, his eyes never leaving his mother's face. "And here she stands, alive, working as a janitor in my building. So before you say one more word, Mother, I'd think very carefully about what truths you want revealed in this room." The threat was implicit, but clear. Tori's face went through a series of complex emotions before settling on icy composure. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the exam room, her heels clicking against the linoleum with sharp finality. Angela hesitated, looking between Julian and Rhea. "I don't understand what's happening," she said quietly, "but I can see this is complicated. I'll wait outside." She left with considerably more grace than Tori had mustered. The doctor cleared her throat. "Now that the drama is handled, let's focus on keeping you alive. We need to do a CT scan to determine the extent of the bleeding. If the ulcer is perforated, you'll need emergency surgery." They wheeled Julian toward imaging, and this time he didn't fight when Rhea stayed behind in the exam room. But as they pushed him through the doorway, he turned his head to look at her one more time. She stood in the corner where his mother's venom had driven her, arms still wrapped protectively around herself, looking lost and alone and more beautiful than any memory he'd tortured himself with. "Don't disappear," he called back to her. "Please, I can't survive it twice." He saw her nod, saw her mouth something that might have been, "I promise," and then the hallway swallowed him and she was gone from view. The CT scan was claustrophobic and noisy. Julian lay in the tube, trying to remain still while his mind raced. Rhea was alive. The foundation of the past 8 years, his grief, his guilt, his slow self-destruction, had been built on his mother's lie. The woman he'd loved, the woman he'd mourned, had been close enough to touch for months while he worked himself into an early grave. Why hadn't she revealed herself? What had his mother done to force her into hiding? And why had Rhea been willing to stay invisible, to watch him suffer from behind the anonymity of a janitor's uniform? The questions multiplied faster than answers could form. When the scan finished and they wheeled him back to the exam room, he braced himself for the possibility that Rhea had broken her promise, that he'd find the room empty and her gone again. But she was there. She'd moved from the corner to sit in the plastic visitor's chair, looking small and exhausted. When he entered, she stood immediately, her eyes searching his face with an intensity that made his chest ache. "The doctor said they'll have results soon," she told him quietly. "They're preparing an operating room just in case." Julian wanted to demand answers immediately, wanted to shake her and hold her and make her explain every incomprehensible choice that had led to this moment. But exhaustion and pain were catching up, dragging at his consciousness like undertow. "Sit with me," he said instead, "until they take me to surgery. Just sit with me." Rhea moved to the bedside, pulling the chair close. Her hand hovered near his for a moment before she gently rested it beside his on the thin hospital blanket. Not quite touching, but close enough that he could feel her warmth. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words seemed inadequate for the enormity of what lay between them, but they were sincere. "For all of it. I'm so sorry." Julian turned his hand over, palm up, an invitation. After a heartbeat of hesitation, Rhea placed her hand in his, their fingers interlaced with the ease of muscle memory, as if 8 years hadn't passed, as if this wasn't the first time they'd truly touched since she'd vanished from his life. "Tell me one thing," he said, his voice rough with medication and emotion. "Did you ever love me? Or was it all, 'I loved you'?" The words came fast and fierce, interrupting his doubt. "I loved you then. I love you now. I never stopped, not for one single day of the past 8 years. Then why?" The question was barely audible. "Why let me think you were dead?" Tears tracked down Rhea's face, but she didn't look away. "Because your mother gave me a choice that wasn't really a choice at all, and I made the decision I thought would keep you safe, even if it destroyed us both." Before Julian could press for details, the trauma doctor returned with results and a surgical team in tow. "Mr. Brennan, the ulcer has perforated. We need to operate immediately to repair the damage and stop the bleeding. The surgery will take approximately 2 to 3 hours." They began preparing him for transport, unhooking monitors and readying the gurney. Julian's grip on Rhea's hand tightened reflexively. The doctor noticed, her expression softening slightly. "She can walk with you to the surgical floor," she offered, "but then she'll need to wait with your other family members." The thought of Rhea facing his mother alone in a waiting room was intolerable. "Call Dr. Imani Jefferson," Julian told Rhea. "She works here, right? In the cardiac unit?" Rhea's eyes widened in surprise that he knew about Imani, but she nodded. "How did you—" "I know more than you think," he said as they began wheeling him toward surgery. "I'll explain when I wake up. Just be here when I wake up. Promise me." "I promise," Rhea said, walking quickly to keep pace with the gurney. "I'll be right here." They reached the surgical floor too quickly. As the team prepared to push through the double doors that would separate them, Julian pulled Rhea down close enough that he could whisper against her ear. "I dreamed of you every night for 8 years. Even now I'm terrified I'll wake up and you'll be gone again." Rhea's breath caught, and when she pulled back to look at him, her face was wet with tears. "I'm real, Julian. I'm here, and I'm not leaving, not this time." The anesthesiologist appeared, syringe in hand. "We need to get started, Mr. Brennan." Julian released Ria's hand reluctantly, feeling the loss of contact like amputation. As the medication began to pull him under, his last conscious sight was of Ria standing in the hallway, watching him with an expression of such complex love and anguish that it followed him down into darkness. Have you ever locked eyes with someone you thought you'd lost forever? That moment when your mind can't process what your heart already knows is real? Tell me about your experience in the comments, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you're already feeling the weight of Julian and Ria's impossible reunion. In the surgical waiting room, Ria sat alone in a hard plastic chair, trying to process the impossibility of the past hour. For 6 months, she'd been invisible, just another late-night janitor in a building full of people who never looked twice at the help. She'd watched Julian slowly kill himself with work and stress, had seen the weight loss, the exhaustion, the way he stayed in his office until 3 or 4 in the morning as if afraid to go home to an empty house. She'd told herself she was protecting him by staying hidden. His mother had made the threat clear 8 years ago. Come back and Julian loses everything. The company, the inheritance, the future Gerald Brennan had built for his son. Tori would burn it all down rather than let her son be with a woman she deemed unacceptable. So Ria had stayed away. Had taken Tori's blood money because her sister was dying, and $50,000 meant the difference between a transplant and a grave. Had disappeared into a new identity, a new life so far beneath Julian's world that their paths would never cross. Except they had crossed, because fate or coincidence or some cruel cosmic joke had led her to apply for a janitorial position at Brennan Tower 6 months ago when she'd lost her previous job. She told herself it was fine, that the building was huge, and Julian worked on the executive floors and she cleaned at night. They'd never actually see each other. That logic had lasted until her first night, when she'd seen him through the glass walls of his penthouse office at 2 a.m., hunched over paperwork, looking gaunt and exhausted in a way that made her chest physically ache. She should have quit immediately, should have walked away before the torture of proximity became unbearable. Instead, she'd stayed. Night after night, she'd cleaned his building, occasionally catching glimpses of him. She learned his patterns, knew which nights he worked latest, which coffee cup was his favorite. She'd become an expert in the architecture of his life while remaining completely invisible to him. Until tonight, when 8 years of careful distance had shattered in the space of a heartbeat. Ria? She looked up to find Dr. Imani Jefferson hurrying toward her, still in scrubs from her shift in the cardiac unit. Imani's face showed equal parts relief and exasperation as she took in Ria's blood-stained hands and shocked expression. "Girl, what the hell is happening?" Imani demanded, dropping into the chair beside her. "I got your text and thought you were hurt." "Not me," Ria managed. "It's Julian. He collapsed. Internal bleeding. They're operating now." Imani's eyes widened. "Julian? As in Julian Brennan? As in the man you've been not-so-secretly pining over while pretending to be invisible?" "He saw me." The words came out broken. "He was bleeding and he saw me and he knows I'm alive." "Oh, honey." Imani pulled Ria into a hug, and the physical comfort broke through the shock that had been holding Ria together. She sagged against her friend, years of loneliness and longing and loss finally finding release. "His mother was here," Ria said when she could speak again. "Tori looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her designer shoe. And Julian, he told her I was family, told the doctors I was family." "What did you expect?" Imani asked gently. "That man loved you 8 years ago, and from what you've told me, he never stopped. He thinks I'm dead. Thought I was dead. Tori told him I died in a car accident." Imani pulled back, her face hardening. "That woman is poison, pure poison." They sat in silence for a moment before Imani asked the question Ria had been avoiding. "Does he know about Mark?" The name of her son hit like a physical blow. Ria shook her head. "I didn't have time. Everything happened so fast." "You're going to have to tell him," Imani said firmly. "And soon. Because if that witch of a mother finds out before you tell him, she'll use it to destroy you both." Ria knew Imani was right, but the thought of telling Julian about their 13-year-old son, about keeping Mark's existence secret for his entire life, was almost more terrifying than Tori's threats. The double doors to the surgical unit swung open, and Tori Brennan appeared with Angela Price trailing behind her. Tori's expression was glacial as her eyes landed on Rhea. She crossed the waiting room with the confidence of someone who owned every space she entered. "You need to leave," Tori said without preamble. "Now, before you do any more damage." Rhea stood, refusing to be intimidated while sitting. "Julian asked me to stay." "My son is confused and in pain," Tori countered. "Seeing you has obviously triggered some kind of breakdown. Once he's recovered and thinking clearly, he'll understand that your presence is inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" Amani interjected, standing beside Rhea in solidarity. "The man told multiple doctors and nurses that she's family. That sounds pretty clear to me." Tori's attention shifted to Amani with dismissive contempt. "This is a private family matter. You're not needed." "I'm exactly where I need to be," Amani said evenly, "supporting my friend." Angela stepped forward, her voice gentler than Tori's but still carrying concern. "I don't understand what's happening, but Julian is clearly agitated. Maybe it would be better if everyone just calmed down until after the surgery." "I'm not leaving," Rhea said quietly but firmly. "I promised Julian I'd be here when he wakes up, and I'm keeping that promise." "You don't keep promises," Tori spat. "You took my money and disappeared. That was our agreement. You stay gone and your sister gets her transplant. You broke that agreement by coming back." The words hung in the air, and Rhea saw Angela's face change as understanding dawned. "You paid her to leave?" Angela asked, her voice careful. "You told Julian she died, but you actually paid her to disappear?" Tori's silence was confirmation enough. Angela trailed off, clearly struggling to process this revelation. "That's beyond manipulative. That's cruel." "It was necessary," Tori said coldly. "My husband had just died. Julian was about to inherit control of Brennan Pharmaceuticals, the board, the shareholders, the media. They were all watching to see if he could handle the responsibility. A relationship with a woman of her background would have destroyed his credibility before he even began." "A woman of her background?" Amani repeated dangerously. "You mean a black woman? A working-class woman? Say what you actually mean." "I mean a woman with no family connections, no social standing, and no ability to navigate the world Julian was about to enter," Tori clarified, though her original meaning was transparent. "She would have been a liability. I did what any mother would do. I protected my son's future." "You destroyed his life," Rhea said, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion. "You took away his choice, and you've been manipulating him ever since." "I gave him an empire," Tori countered. "Brennan Pharmaceuticals has tripled in value under his leadership. He's respected, powerful, successful. What would he have been with you? A brilliant mind wasted on someone who couldn't even finish her own doctorate." The verbal blow landed with precision. Rhea felt the shame of her interrupted education like a fresh wound. She'd been 3 semesters from completing her PhD when Tori's ultimatum had forced her to disappear. In the 8 years since, she'd worked multiple jobs to support herself and Mark, never finding the time or money to return to school. "That's enough," Angela said suddenly, her voice carrying surprising steel. "Tori, what you did was wrong. Regardless of your intentions, lying about someone's death is unforgivable." Tori turned her cold gaze on Angela. "Stay out of this. This doesn't concern you." "It absolutely concerns me," Angela replied. "I'm engaged to Julian. I deserve to know if his mother is capable of this level of manipulation." Rhea found herself saying. "You were engaged to him, but you're not anymore." Angela's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "He told me right before they took him to surgery. He said he was ending things with you." The words clearly caught Angela off guard, but after a moment of processing, she laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You know what? I'm not even surprised. I always knew his heart wasn't in this engagement. I just didn't know why." She looked at Rhea with something almost like sympathy. "Now I understand. You can't compete with a ghost, or in this case, a woman who turned out to not be a ghost at all." "Angela," Tori began. "No," Angela interrupted. "I'm done. With this conversation, with this engagement, with pretending that what Julian and I have is anything more than convenient." She turned to Rhea. "I hope you know what you're getting into. Being with Julian Brennan means dealing with her," she gestured at Tori, "for the rest of your life." Angela walked away with surprising dignity, leaving Rhea, Amani, and Tori in tense silence. After a long moment, Tori spoke, her voice dropping to something almost conversational. You really think you can just walk back into his life? That 8 years of absence can be erased? I don't know, Rhea answered honestly, but I'm going to try. I'll destroy you, Tori said matter-of-factly. I did it once. I can do it again. Only this time I'll make sure there's no coming back. Then you'll lose your son completely, Imani interjected, because I guarantee once Julian knows the full truth, he'll choose Rhea over you. Tori's smile was cold. We'll see. She left with the same glacial composure she'd arrived with, leaving Rhea shaking with adrenaline and fear. Imani pulled her back into the chairs, rubbing circles on her back until the trembling subsided. She's going to find out about Mark, Rhea whispered. She's going to investigate, and she's going to find him, and she's going to use him against me. Then tell Julian first, Imani urged. Take away her weapon by being honest. Rhea knew it was the right advice. But the thought of confessing to Julian that he had a 13-year-old son, a son she'd kept from him for his entire life, was paralyzing. How did you tell someone that not only had you been alive while they mourned you, but you'd been raising their child alone? Hours passed in anxious silence. Other families came and went from the waiting room, their dramas playing out in hushed conversations and tired tears. Imani stayed through her entire break, only leaving when her pager summoned her back to the cardiac unit. Text me the second he's out of surgery, Imani ordered. And Rhea, tell him about Mark, today, before everything gets even more complicated, Rhea promised, though she had no idea how she'd find the courage. Finally, after what felt like days compressed into hours, the trauma surgeon appeared. She looked tired but satisfied as she approached Rhea. The surgery went well. We repaired the perforation and stopped the bleeding. Mr. Brennan will be in recovery for about an hour, then we'll move him to a private room. He should wake up fully in 2 to 3 hours. Relief washed through Rhea so intensely she had to sit down. He's okay? He will be, with proper rest and dietary changes. The ulcer was caused by severe stress and poor self-care. If he continues on his current path, we'll be having this conversation again in a few months, possibly with a worse outcome. The doctor's message was clear. Julian had been killing himself slowly, and tonight had been the crisis point. Can I see him? Rhea asked. When he wakes up? The doctor hesitated. Are you family? She is, came a voice from the doorway. Trey Locke stood there, having apparently been lurking in the corridor. Julian made that very clear. The doctor looked between them, clearly sensing the tension, but unwilling to navigate family politics. Fine. I'll have a nurse come get you when he's settled in his room and starting to wake up. After the doctor left, Trey approached Rhea with calculated interest. So, you're the mysterious janitor who's got Julian so worked up. Who are you really? Nobody important, Rhea said, echoing Tori's earlier words. I don't believe that for a second. Trey's smile was sharp. Julian Brennan doesn't fall apart over nobody, and Tori looks at you like you're her worst nightmare, which makes you very interesting to me. I'm not interested in whatever games you're playing, Rhea said flatly. Not a game, Trey corrected. Business. Julian's been distracted for months, making poor decisions, letting opportunities slip through his fingers. The board is concerned. And now I discover he's been fixated on a janitor. That's the kind of information that shapes conversations about leadership fitness. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Trey was looking for ammunition, and he'd just found it. Leave her alone, Locke. Tori's voice cut through the corridor. She'd returned with reinforcements, 2 men in expensive suits that screamed, corporate security. This situation is handled. Trey assessed the situation, clearly calculating whether to push further or retreat. Of course, Tori. I'm sure you have everything under control. His smile suggested he knew she didn't. Julian and I have a board meeting tomorrow afternoon. I'll expect him to be there, ready to address some concerning issues. He left, but his presence had poisoned the atmosphere. Rhea realized she'd become a pawn in corporate warfare she didn't understand. You need to leave now, Tori said, all pretense of civility abandoned. My security team will ensure you exit the building. If you attempt to contact Julian again, I'll have you arrested for harassment. You can't do that, Rhea protested. Watch me. Tori gestured to the security guards. But before they could move, a nurse appeared. Miss Kingsley, Mr. Brennan is asking for you. He's quite agitated, and we'd like to avoid increasing his blood pressure if possible." The nurse's timing was perfect, whether intentional or accidental. Tori's face went through several expressions before settling on barely controlled rage. "I'll deal with you later," she promised Rhea in a low voice. Rhea followed the nurse through corridors to a private room, her heart pounding. Behind the closed door, she could hear Julian's voice, hoarse from intubation but unmistakable, arguing with someone about being allowed to leave. The nurse knocked once and entered. "Mr. Brennan, you have a visitor, and you need to stay in that bed or I'll have you restrained." Julian was sitting up despite obvious pain, one hand pressed to his surgical incision, the other reaching for the IV line like he was considering removing it himself. When he saw Rhea, his entire body sagged with relief. "You're here," he said, his voice rough. I promised," Rhea interrupted, crossing to his bedside. "I promised I'd be here." Julian's hand found hers immediately, fingers interlacing with desperate strength. "My mother tried to have you removed." "She tried," Rhea confirmed. The nurse intervened. "God bless nurses," Julian muttered. Then, louder, to the nurse still hovering in the doorway, "Can we have some privacy?" The nurse looked ready to refuse, but something in Julian's expression made her relent. 10 minutes, then she needs to leave so you can rest." She closed the door behind her, leaving them alone for the first time since the surgery. Julian tugged Rhea's hand, pulling her to sit on the edge of his bed. His free hand rose to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone as if confirming she was solid and real. "Tell me everything," he said. "No more cryptic statements, no more protecting me. Tell me everything that happened 8 years ago." Rhea took a shaky breath. This was the moment she'd dreaded and anticipated in equal measure, the moment when all the secrets would finally surface. "Your mother came to see me 3 days after your father's funeral," she began. We're dealing with lawyers and shareholders, trying to hold the company together. I was working in the lab, trying to give you space to grieve." She paused, gathering courage. "Tori told me to come to her office. When I got there, she had a check already written, $50,000. She said if I took it and disappeared, my sister would get the transplant she needed. If I refused," Rhea's voice cracked, "she said she'd make sure my sister died on the waiting list, and she'd destroy any chance you had of successfully inheriting the company." Julian's face had gone dangerously still. "Go on." "I told her I needed to talk to you first. She said if I said one word to you, the offer was off the table and she'd ruin both our lives. I had 24 hours to decide, my sister's life or our relationship." "You chose your sister," Julian said quietly. It wasn't accusation, just statement. I chose your future too," Rhea said, tears flowing freely now. "She convinced me that your inheritance was contingent on making an appropriate marriage, that if you stayed with me, you'd lose everything your father had built. I couldn't be the reason you lost his legacy. So you disappeared. I took the money. Tori arranged for my sister's transplant, and then she arranged the accident." Julian's grip on her hand tightened painfully. "The car accident was real?" "Real enough. She had someone run me off the road. I woke up in a hospital with a broken arm, cracked ribs, and Tori standing over me with very clear instructions. I had 72 hours to leave town, change my name, and never contact you again. If I did, she'd finish the job properly next time." "She tried to kill you." Julian's voice was flat with shock. "She tried to eliminate a problem," Rhea corrected bitterly. "And it worked. I disappeared. She held a funeral. God knows whose body was in that casket, and you grieved someone who was actually just gone." 8 years, Julian said, his voice breaking. 8 years I thought you were dead. 8 years He stopped, unable to continue. Rhea climbed fully onto the bed, careful of his surgical wound, and wrapped her arms around him. He buried his face in her shoulder, and she felt his body shake with silent sobs, years of grief and anger and loss finally finding release. "I'm sorry," she whispered into his hair. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you. I thought—" "You should have told me," he said harshly, pulling back to look at her. "You should have trusted me to make my own choices." "I know. I've known every day for 8 years, but I was 24 and terrified, and my sister was dying. Your mother gave me an impossible choice, and I made it the best I could." Julian's hands framed her face. his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her feel transparent. What changed? Why come back now? This was the moment, the confession she'd been avoiding. Rhea opened her mouth to tell him about Mark, to reveal the son he didn't know existed, when the door burst open. Trey Locke stood in the doorway with a professional photographer and 2 board members. Camera flashes exploded before either Julian or Rhea could react. "The board will be very interested in these," Trey said with false sympathy. The CEO, fresh from emergency surgery, in bed with a member of the janitorial staff. Questions about judgment and leadership stability seem increasingly relevant. Julian moved to stand, but Rhea pushed him back down gently. She climbed off the bed, facing Trey with more courage than she felt. "Get out," she said firmly, "or I'll call security." "You don't have that authority," Trey countered, "but I do have the authority to call an emergency board meeting, which I'm doing, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Julian, I expect you to be there, assuming you can explain this situation in a way that doesn't result in a vote of no confidence." He left with his entourage, leaving Julian and Rhea in shocked silence. "He's moving against me," Julian said, his voice cold with understanding, "using you as evidence that I'm unstable." "I should go," Rhea said miserably. "I'm only making things worse for you." "Don't you dare!" Julian reached for her hand again. "Don't you dare run away again. We'll face this together." But Rhea knew it wasn't that simple. She had a 13-year-old son to protect, a job she needed to keep, and a past that Tori could weaponize in countless ways. Being with Julian meant exposing herself and Mark to dangers she'd spent years avoiding. "I need to go home," she said gently. "Just for tonight, to think, to process. This is all happening so fast." Julian looked like he wanted to argue, but the pain medication was pulling at him, making his eyelids heavy. "Promise me you'll come back tomorrow, before the board meeting. We need to present a united front." "I promise," Rhea said, though guilt twisted in her stomach. She had to tell him about Mark before that board meeting, had to give him the full truth so he could make informed decisions. She kissed his forehead gently, breathing in the familiar scent of him beneath the hospital smell. "Rest. Heal. I'll see you tomorrow." As she left the hospital, Rhea felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her again. She'd fled from Tori's threats once before. Now she had to decide if she was brave enough, if she loved Julian enough, to stand and fight. Her phone buzzed with a text from Imani. "Did you tell him?" Rhea typed back, "Tomorrow. I'll tell him tomorrow." But as she walked through the dark parking garage toward the bus stop, because she couldn't afford a car on a janitor's salary, she wondered if tomorrow would be too late. Tori was already moving against her, and Trey had just made it clear that Julian's professional life was now at stake. She pulled out her phone and looked at her screensaver. Mark's latest school photo, his smile showing Julian's dimples and her eyes. Their son. The secret that could either bind them together or destroy them completely. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow she'd tell Julian everything, and they'd face whatever came next together. But tonight, she needed to get home to Mark and figure out how to protect him from the storm that was coming. Chapter 2. Rhea arrived home at nearly 3 a.m. to find her apartment dark except for the glow of a laptop screen in the living room. Mark sat on the couch, supposedly doing homework but clearly waiting up for her. At 13, he was already showing signs of the man he'd become, tall for his age with sharp features that would one day be striking, features that were becoming increasingly, unmistakably, Brennan. "Mom?" He closed the laptop quickly, concern etched on his face. "You're covered in blood. What happened?" Rhea looked down at her uniform, seeing the rust-brown stains for the first time. Julian's blood, dried now, marking her like evidence of a crime. "There was an accident at work. Someone got hurt, but they're okay now." Mark stood, crossing to her with the protective instinct he'd developed over years of being the only man in their small family. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby. Just tired." She hugged him, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, cheap drugstore brand, but it smelled like home. "Why are you still up? You have school tomorrow." "Couldn't sleep." Mark pulled back, studying her face with Julian's perceptive eyes. "You look different, like something big happened." He'd always been unnervingly observant, Rhea had spent 13 years carefully avoiding conversations about his father beyond the basics. He doesn't know about you. He's a good man. He would love you if he could. Now those careful omissions were about to explode. Go to bed, she said gently. We'll talk in the morning. Mark hesitated, clearly wanting to push for more information, but finally nodded and headed to his bedroom. Rhea waited until she heard his door close before collapsing onto the couch, exhaustion and emotion catching up all at once. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Julian. Got your number from your employee file. Please don't disappear. I meant what I said. We face this together. Below that, another text. Also, I'm supposed to be resting, but all I can think about is that you're real and alive, and somewhere in this city. Are you safe? Rhea's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She should tell him about Mark now, over text, rip off the bandage before she lost her nerve. But this wasn't something you revealed through a phone screen. This required facing him, watching his reaction, giving him space to process the impossible. She typed back, I'm home. I'm safe. Rest. I'll come to the hospital in the morning and we'll talk about everything. I promise. No more secrets. The response came almost immediately. Everything? Everything, she confirmed, though her chest tightened with fear. Then I'll wait. Sleep well, Rhea. I love you. I never stopped. The words hit like a physical blow. He loved her. Present tense. After 8 years of separation, after learning about her lies and omissions, after discovering his mother had orchestrated everything, he loved her still. Rhea typed, I love you too, 3 times, deleting it each time. She didn't deserve to say those words until he knew the complete truth, until he knew about Mark. Instead, she wrote, see you tomorrow. She showered, watching Julian's blood spiral down the drain in rusty ribbons. Her uniform went straight into the trash. She couldn't imagine wearing it again, couldn't imagine returning to the anonymity of janitorial work when Julian now knew she was alive. That chapter of her life had ended the moment their eyes met in his office doorway. But what came next? She had no degree, no career, no means of supporting herself and Mark beyond menial labor. Julian would offer to help, of course he would, but accepting his money felt too much like accepting Tori's blood money 8 years ago. She needed to stand on her own feet, needed to be an equal partner rather than someone he rescued. These thoughts followed her into restless sleep and haunted her dreams. She woke at 6 to Mark already dressed for school, making himself cereal with the practiced efficiency of a kid who'd learned early to be self-sufficient. You want to tell me what's really going on? He asked without preamble, not looking up from his bowl. Rhea sat across from him at their small kitchen table. How do you know something's going on? Mom, you came home at 3 a.m. covered in blood. You've been crying. Don't say you haven't. Your eyes are all puffy. And you're looking at me like I'm about to break. So yeah, something's going on. She'd always known this day would come, had rehearsed various versions of this conversation in her head hundreds of times, but none of those rehearsals had prepared her for the reality of telling her son that his father, the man he'd asked about since he was old enough to form questions, was suddenly, impossibly within reach. The person who got hurt last night, she began carefully. It was Julian Brennan. Mark's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. My father. It wasn't a question. Mark knew his father's name, knew he was successful and wealthy and completely unaware of his son's existence. They'd had age-appropriate versions of this conversation throughout Mark's childhood, each one more detailed than the last. Yes, he collapsed from internal bleeding. I was there when it happened. And he saw you. Again, not a question. Mark was putting pieces together with frightening speed. He saw you and now he knows you're alive. Yes. Mark set down his spoon, his young face cycling through emotions too complex for a 13-year-old to process. So what happens now? Does he want to meet me? He doesn't know about you yet. The confession felt like failure. I didn't have time to tell him. Everything happened so fast, and then he had surgery and She stopped, unable to articulate the fear that had kept her silent. You're scared he won't want me, Mark said flatly. No, Rhea reached across the table, gripping his hand. Baby, no, I'm scared he'll be angry at me for keeping you from him. I'm scared his mother will use you against us somehow. I'm scared of 1,000 things, but I am not, will never be, scared that your father won't want you. If Julian Brennan knew you existed, nothing in this world could keep him away. Then why didn't you tell him 8 years ago? The question carried hurt that Mark usually kept hidden. Why did you let me grow up without a dad when you could have just told him about me? It was the question Rhea had been asking herself for 13 years. Because his mother threatened us. She said if I stayed in Julian's life, she'd destroy him professionally and make sure you and I had nothing. I was 24, pregnant, terrified, and alone. I made the choice I thought would keep you safe. By making me grow up thinking my father didn't want me? The accusation landed with devastating accuracy. I told you he didn't know. You told me a lot of things, Mom, but at the end of the day I didn't have a dad, and now you're saying he was close enough to find this whole time, but you kept us apart. Mark stood, shoving his chair back. I need to go to school. Mark, wait. I just need some time to think, okay? His voice cracked, caught between childhood and adolescence. This is a lot. He grabbed his backpack and left before Rhea could respond. She sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the apartment settle into silence, feeling like she was failing everyone she loved. Her phone rang, Imani calling before her shift started. Did you tell him? Imani asked without greeting. I told Mark. Julian's this morning. How'd Mark take it? He's hurt, angry, confused, all the things I knew he'd be. Rhea pressed her palm to her forehead, fighting the headache building behind her eyes. I've screwed this up so badly, Imani. You did what you thought was right at the time, Imani said firmly. 24-year-old, you made impossible choices. Now, 32-year-old, you gets to fix them, but only if you're honest. Complete honesty, Rhea. No more protecting Julian from the truth. After they hung up, Rhea forced herself to shower and change. She chose her clothes carefully, not the professional wardrobe she'd sold 8 years ago, but the best of what she had now. Simple jeans, a clean blouse, her one good jacket. She looked respectable, if not impressive. Certainly not like the sophisticated researcher she'd once been. The bus ride to the hospital took 40 minutes. Rhea used the time to rehearse what she'd say. Julian, you have a son. His name is Mark. He's 13, brilliant, and looks exactly like you. Or maybe, I need to tell you something that's going to change everything. Or perhaps, I'm sorry I kept this from you, but I have a reason. No preamble would make this easy. She'd just have to say it and deal with the fallout. The hospital felt different in daylight, less urgent, more routine. Rhea found Julian's room easily, but paused outside the door when she heard voices inside. Tori's cold tone was unmistakable. Cannot seriously be considering continuing this ridiculous involvement. The board meeting is in 6 hours, and Trey has ammunition. This woman will cost you everything Father built. Father would have loved her, Julian replied, his voice still rough but strong. He always said Brennan Pharmaceuticals should be built on compassion and innovation. Rhea embodied both. She's a janitor. She has a PhD in biochemistry, or she would have if you hadn't destroyed her life. I protected your future. You stole 8 years from me, Julian said, and the pain in his voice made Rhea's chest ache. 8 years I could have spent with the woman I loved. 8 years of grief and guilt and slow self-destruction. You didn't protect me, Mother. You broke me. Silence followed this declaration. Then Tori's voice, colder than before. If you choose her over this company, over your father's legacy, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of judgment you possess. Trey is already circulating photos from last night. The pharmaceutical community is small, Julian. Your reputation will be destroyed. Then I'll rebuild it, somewhere else, without you. The finality in those words seemed to stun Tori into silence. Rhea took the opportunity to knock, unwilling to eavesdrop further. Come in, Julian called. Rhea pushed open the door to find Julian sitting up in bed, looking pale but determined. Tori stood by the window, her expression a mask of barely controlled rage. The tension in the room was suffocating. You, Tori said, her voice dripping venom, you have some nerve showing your face here. I invited her, Julian said sharply, and you were just leaving, Mother. Tori's gaze moved between Julian and Rhea, calculating and cold. This isn't over. The board meeting is at 2 p.m. I suggest you prepare for some very difficult questions." She swept past Rhea without another glance, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and barely suppressed fury. Julian's entire body seemed to relax once his mother left. He held out his hand to Rhea, who crossed the room to take it. "Thank you for coming." "I promised." She sat in the chair beside his bed, their hands still linked. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone cut me open and rearranged my organs," he said wryly. "But better, clearer. The doctor says I can leave tomorrow if there are no complications." "That's good." "Rhea." Julian tugged her hand gently. "You said no more secrets. So tell me, what else haven't I heard?" This was the moment, the confession that would either bind them together or shatter everything. Rhea took a deep breath. "Julian, The door burst open again. A nurse rushed in, followed by 2 security guards. "Mr. Brennan, we need you to stay calm. There's a situation developing." "What kind of situation?" Julian demanded. "A young man is in the lobby claiming to be your son. Security stopped him, but he's quite insistent. He says his mother—" The nurse glanced at Rhea, making connections. "He says his mother is here and he needs to see her." Rhea's blood went cold. "Mark." Julian's hand tightened around hers, his face transforming as understanding dawned. "Your son." She couldn't speak, could only nod as years of secrets combusted in a single moment. "How old?" Julian's voice was barely audible. 13. The word came out broken. "He turned 13 in March." Julian released her hand like she'd burned him. His face cycled through shock, betrayal, anguish, and something that looked almost like wonder. "I have a son." "Yes." "You've known for 13 years that I have a son, and you didn't tell me." "Julian." "Bring him up," Julian told the security guards, his voice flat with shock. "Bring my son to me." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. "Sir, hospital policy." "Now." The command cut through their hesitation. They left to retrieve Mark. Silence stretched between Julian and Rhea, heavy with everything unspoken. She wanted to explain, to justify, to make him understand the impossible position she'd been in, but his face had closed off, become the mask of the CEO who'd built an empire through force of will and calculated detachment. "How long have you been back?" he asked finally. "In the city." 6 months. 6 months. He repeated it like he was testing the words for hidden meaning. "You've been watching me for 6 months, cleaning my building, knowing I had a son, and you never said a word. I was trying to protect you." "Don't." The word was harsh. "Don't tell me you were protecting me. You took 13 years of my child's life. You let me believe you were dead while you were raising my son. That's not protection. That's—" He stopped, unable to find words adequate to the betrayal. "I was pregnant when your mother gave me the ultimatum," Rhea said desperately. "I didn't even know yet. I found out 2 weeks after I disappeared. I had no money, no support system, a newborn on the way, and Tori's threats hanging over my head. What was I supposed to do?" "Trust me." Julian's voice rose despite the pain it caused. "You should have trusted me to protect you both, to make my own choices about my own child. You would have lost everything. I lost everything anyway." He was breathing hard now, his surgical wound clearly causing pain. "I lost you. I lost him. I've spent 8 years barely existing. So tell me, Rhea, what exactly did your silence protect me from?" Before she could answer, the door opened and Mark walked in. The teenager stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes locked on Julian with intensity that matched the man in the hospital bed. For a long moment, father and son simply stared at each other. The resemblance was undeniable. Same bone structure, same stormy gray-green eyes, same expression of guarded intelligence. Mark was still gangly with adolescence, but he would grow into Julian's lean, commanding presence. "Hi," Mark said finally, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm Mark Kingsley. I'm your son." The simple introduction seemed to break something in Julian. His face crumpled and tears he'd been holding back spilled over. "Come here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Please, come here." Mark crossed the room slowly, uncertain. When he reached the bedside, Julian's hand rose, trembling, to touch his son's face. "You're real," he whispered. "You're real, and you're here, and you're mine." "I'm real," Mark confirmed, his own eyes filling with tears. "I've wanted to meet you my whole life. Mom has all these articles about you, about the company, about the research you're doing. She always said you were brilliant and kind and that you'd love me if you knew about me. If I'd known, Julian's voice broke. If I'd known, nothing in this world could have kept me away. Do you understand that? Nothing. Mark nodded, and then Julian pulled him into a careful hug, mindful of his surgical wound, but unwilling to let this moment pass without physical connection. The teenager melted into his father's embrace, and Rhea watched through tears as two pieces of her heart finally found each other. When they pulled apart, Julian wiped his eyes with no shame. Tell me about yourself. Everything. I want to know everything. Mark glanced at Rhea, seeking permission or perhaps reassurance. She nodded encouragingly, despite the guilt crushing her chest. I'm in 8th grade, Mark began. I'm good at science, really good. Mom says I get it from both of you. I want to study biochemistry when I go to college, maybe work in pharmaceuticals like you. He paused. I play basketball, but I'm better at chess. I read a lot, and He trailed off, suddenly shy. What? Julian encouraged gently. I used to stand outside your building sometimes, Mark admitted, just to see where you worked, to feel closer to you, I guess. Mom didn't know. I'd tell her I was at the library. Julian's eyes found Rhea's over Mark's head, and the pain in them was devastating. Their son had been so desperate for connection that he'd stalked his own father's workplace. 13 years of absence compressed into that single confession. You never have to stand outside again, Julian said firmly. You're my son. You belong in my life, in my world, anywhere I am. Do you understand? Mark nodded, clearly struggling not to cry again. A knock interrupted the moment. The nurse from earlier peeked in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Brennan, you have multiple people in the lobby demanding to see you. Your business partner, several board members, and she lowered her voice. Your mother is back with a lawyer. Julian's expression hardened. Tell them I'm recovering from surgery and not taking visitors, except, he looked at Rhea and Mark, except my family. The nurse nodded and left. Rhea noticed Julian had deliberately emphasized the word family, making his claim public and unmistakable. I need to tell you something, Julian said, addressing Mark seriously. About my mother, your grandmother. She's not a good person. She's the reason your mother disappeared, the reason I didn't know about you. She's going to try to cause problems, to use you against us somehow. Mom already warned me, Mark said. She told me this morning about the threats, about everything that happened 8 years ago. Julian looked at Rhea with an expression she couldn't quite read. Did she tell you I was sick? Is that why you came? I came because I was scared you were dying and I'd never get to meet you, Mark answered honestly. I skipped school. I knew Mom was coming here to tell you about me and I couldn't wait anymore. I've waited 13 years. I couldn't wait one more day. The raw honesty in Mark's voice seemed to affect Julian deeply. He pulled his son close again, and Rhea saw his shoulders shake with silent emotion. I'm sorry I missed so much, Julian said when he could speak. Your first words, your first steps, every birthday and holiday and milestone. I can't get those years back, but I swear to you, I swear, I will be there for every day forward if you'll let me. I will, Mark said immediately. I want that. I've always wanted that. They stayed like that for a long moment, and Rhea felt both joy at their connection and crushing guilt for the years she'd stolen from them both. Finally, Julian pulled back and looked at Rhea directly. We need to talk. About everything. But first, he turned to Mark. Can you give your mother and me a few minutes alone? Mark hesitated, clearly worried about leaving his newly discovered father. Julian seemed to understand. I'm not going anywhere, I promise. When you come back, we'll talk more. I want to know everything about you, favorite foods, books you've read, what makes you laugh, all of it. Reassured, Mark nodded. Okay, I'll wait outside. He paused at the door. Dad? The word was tentative, testing. Julian's face transformed with wonder. Yes? I'm really glad I finally met you. Me too, son. Me too. After Mark left, silence settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Julian's expression shifted from wonder to something harder, more guarded. 13 years, he said finally. You kept my son from me for 13 years. I know. Let me finish. His voice was quiet but carried steel. I understand why you took the money initially. Your sister was dying. You were desperate. My mother is a monster. I even understand why you stayed away those first few years. But you've been back for 6 months, Rhea. 6 months of watching me, working in my building, and you never once tried to tell me I had a son. I was afraid, Rhea admitted. Afraid you'd hate me. Afraid Tori would make good on her threats. Afraid of disrupting Mark's life. Afraid of everything. So you let me keep bleeding. Julian's hand pressed against his surgical wound. Literally and figuratively. You watched me slowly destroy myself and did nothing. I didn't know how to approach you. You say my name. His voice rose despite the pain it caused. You walk into my office and say, Julian, I'm alive and we have a son. That's how you approach me. Not by hiding and watching and letting me think the woman I loved was dead. You're right, Rhea said, tears streaming down her face. You're absolutely right. I was a coward. I made terrible choices, and I hurt you and Mark in the process. I can't defend what I did. I can only tell you I'm sorry, and that every single day of the past 8 years, I wished I'd been braver. Julian looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Do you have any idea what it's like? He asked quietly. To love someone so completely that their loss breaks you. To spend 8 years trying to figure out how to keep existing in a world they've left? I became a machine, Rhea. Work and sleep and occasional food. I forgot how to feel anything except ambition and exhaustion. My ulcers, they started about 6 months after you died. My body was destroying itself because my heart was already gone. I know. You don't know, he interrupted, because you had our son. You had a piece of us that kept you connected to life. I had nothing. Just grief and guilt and the growing suspicion that I'd somehow failed you, that maybe if I'd been stronger or smarter or more attentive, you wouldn't have died. The pain in his voice was unbearable. Rhea moved to the bed, sitting on the edge despite the risk of hurting him. Julian, I love you. I have loved you every single day since I was 24 years old. The choices I made were wrong, but they came from love. Love for you, for Mark, for the life I thought you deserved. I deserved the truth, he said, but some of the hardness had left his voice. I deserved to know my son, to raise him, to be his father from the beginning. I know, and I'm sorry. I will spend the rest of my life being sorry for taking that from you. She reached for his hand tentatively. This time, after a pause, he let her take it. But we can't change the past. We can only decide what happens next. Julian was quiet for a long moment. What happens next is complicated. There's a board meeting in 4 hours where Trey is going to try to remove me as CEO. He's using you, us, as evidence that I'm unstable and unfit to lead. My mother will support him because she'd rather destroy the company than let me be with you. And now there's Mark to consider. He's going to be exposed to all of this ugliness. Then we protect him, Rhea said firmly. Whatever it takes. Mark doesn't deserve to be caught in this war. None of us deserve this, Julian agreed. But here we are. He studied her face, and she saw the moment his expression shifted slightly. You really never stopped loving me? Never. Not for a second. Even when I got engaged to Angela? Especially then. It hurt so much to see you with her, but I also understood. You thought I was dead. You were trying to move on. And she seemed kind, like she'd take care of you even if she didn't love you the way I did. Julian's laugh was bitter. Angela knew, you know. Tori told her the truth about you 2 years ago. She was helping my mother keep me away from you if you ever resurfaced. The revelation was another betrayal stacked on top of so many others. I'm sorry. I ended it last night, told her before the surgery that we were done. She took it better than expected. I think she always knew my heart wasn't in it. He squeezed Rhea's hand. There's only one woman I've ever wanted to marry. She's been dead for 8 years, or so I thought. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Before Rhea could respond, Mark knocked and peeked back in. Sorry, but there are a lot of angry people in the hallway, he said nervously. One lady in a really expensive suit said she's your mother and she has legal right to be in here. Julian sighed. Let's get this over with. Rhea, Mark, stay. I want you both here for this. Tori entered with a lawyer in tow, her expression triumphant. She stopped short when she saw Mark, her face going through rapid calculations. "So it's true," she said slowly. "She had a child." "I have a son," Julian corrected. "His name is Mark. Mark, this is Tori Brennan, my mother, though I use that term loosely." Tori's eyes swept over Mark, and Rhea saw her taking in every Brennan feature, every genetic confirmation. "How convenient," she said coldly. "A child appears exactly when she needs leverage." "I'm not leverage," Mark said with surprising strength. "I'm his son, and I have the DNA test Mom did when I was born to prove it." Tori's lawyer stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan, I'm here to inform you that the board has called an emergency meeting. Given the circumstances, your medical emergency, your involvement with this woman, and now the revelation of an illegitimate child, there are serious questions about your fitness to lead Brennan Pharmaceuticals." "Noted," Julian said coolly. "I'll be there." "In your condition," the lawyer began. "I said I'll be there." Julian's voice carried absolute authority. "Now get out. Both of you. I'm trying to spend time with my family." "You're making a mistake," Tori said. "I can still salvage this if you end things with her now. We'll do damage control, arrange support for the child without acknowledging paternity publicly, find you a more appropriate—" "Get out!" Julian's voice was deadly quiet. "Before I say things I won't regret." Tori looked at Mark one more time, her expression calculating. 13 years old, which means she was pregnant when I paid her off. She took my money knowing she was carrying your child. That's fraud, Julian. I can have her arrested." "Try it," Julian said flatly, "and I'll expose every illegal thing you did to force her away. The staged accident, the threats, the extortion. You want a legal battle, Mother? I have 8 years of billable hours and excellent lawyers. Do you really want to see who wins?" Tori's face went white with rage, but she left without another word. Her lawyer followed, looking uncomfortable with the whole situation. After they were gone, Julian sagged back against the pillows, exhausted. "That woman," he said to Mark, "is the reason you grew up without a father. Remember that." Mark nodded solemnly. Then, hesitantly, "She's really scary." Despite everything, both Julian and Rhea laughed. "Yeah," Julian agreed, "she really is." He held out his hand to Mark. "Come sit, both of you. We have 4 hours before I have to go fight for my company. I want to spend it getting to know my son." Mark moved to Julian's other side, and Rhea stayed where she was on the edge of the bed. For the next 3 hours they talked, really talked. Mark told stories about school, about his friends, about the science projects he'd worked on. Julian shared about the company, about the research they were doing, about the breakthroughs they were close to achieving. Watching them together, seeing their identical mannerisms, the way they both got animated when discussing science, Rhea felt her heart break and heal simultaneously. This was what she'd stolen from them, but this was also what they could have now if they were brave enough to fight for it. Dr. Imani stopped by during her rounds, her eyes widening when she saw Mark sitting beside Julian's bed. "Well," she said with a knowing smile, "I see the secrets are out." "Imani, meet my son," Julian said, pride evident in his voice despite the complexity of the situation. "Mark, this is Dr. Jefferson. She's been taking care of your mother for years." "And making sure your father didn't kill himself with neglect," Imani added, checking Julian's vitals with practiced efficiency. "Your numbers are improving, but you're not ready to check out yet, and you're definitely not ready to attend a board meeting." "I don't have a choice," Julian said. "If I'm not there, Trey wins by default." "Then we come with you," Mark said suddenly. Both adults looked at him in surprise. "You said I'm your son, that I belong in your life, so let me be there. Let everyone see we're a family." "Mark, that meeting is going to be brutal," Julian warned. "They'll say terrible things about your mother, about our relationship, about you being illegitimate. It won't be pleasant." "I'm 13, not 6, Mark countered. "I can handle it. And maybe seeing me there, seeing that you're choosing your family, will make them realize you're not unstable. You're just human." Julian looked at Rhea questioningly. She wanted to protect Mark from the ugliness that was coming, but she also recognized the wisdom in his words. Besides, trying to shield him now felt dishonest after 13 years of secrecy. "It's his choice," she said quietly. He's old enough to decide. Then we go together, Julian said firmly. All three of us. They want to judge my fitness to lead? Fine. Let them see that I'm man enough to claim my family publicly, regardless of circumstances. Have you ever kept a secret that you knew would change everything? A truth that terrified you because revealing it might cost you the person you love most? Share your story in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. Subscribe if you're invested in whether Julian can forgive Rhea for this devastating secret. The board meeting was held in Brennan Pharmaceuticals' main conference room, all glass walls and expensive furniture designed to intimidate. Julian arrived in a wheelchair despite his protests, with strict instructions from Dr. Amani not to stand for extended periods. Rhea pushed the chair and Mark walked beside them, a united front against whatever was coming. The room went silent when they entered. 15 board members sat around the massive table, with Trey Locke at the head looking smug. Tori sat to his right, her expression unreadable. Various executives and department heads lined the walls. This was clearly meant to be a public execution. Julian, Trey said with false sympathy, we weren't sure you'd make it. Perhaps we should reschedule given your medical condition. I'm here, Julian interrupted. Let's proceed. Trey's eyes moved to Rhea and Mark, calculating. This is a closed board meeting. Visitors aren't appropriate. They're not visitors, Julian said calmly. Rhea Kingsley is my partner. Mark Kingsley is my son. If this meeting is about my fitness to lead, then my family is absolutely relevant. Murmurs rippled through the room. Several board members were clearly seeing Mark for the first time, taking in the undeniable Brennan features. One older woman, Caroline Durst, who'd been Gerald Brennan's friend, smiled slightly. Very well, Trey said, his tone suggesting he'd expected this. Let's begin. I've called this emergency meeting to address serious concerns about Julian Brennan's capacity to lead this company. In the past 24 hours, he's been hospitalized for what appears to be stress-induced medical emergency. He's been photographed in compromising positions with a member of the janitorial staff, and he's revealed the existence of an illegitimate child. These facts suggest severely compromised judgment. Compromised how? Julian asked mildly. Be specific. Trey produced a folder, distributing copies around the table. These are the photos from last night. The CEO of Brennan Pharmaceuticals in a hospital bed with a janitor. The optics alone are disastrous. The optics of me spending time with the woman I love? Julian's voice remained calm. The woman I've loved for 13 years? The woman who's been working in our building under a false identity for 6 months, Trey countered. The woman who apparently had your child and never told you. This is exactly the kind of messy personal drama that reflects poorly on leadership. Or it's the kind of human complexity that makes me a better leader, Julian replied. He gestured for Rhea to move his wheelchair closer to the table, positioning himself at the opposite end from Trey. You want to talk about judgment? Let's talk about judgment. For 8 years, I believed Rhea was dead because my mother lied to me. She orchestrated an elaborate deception involving staged accidents, paid disappearances, and psychological manipulation. And I never questioned it because I trusted that my family had my best interests at heart. Tori's face remained impassive, but several board members looked shocked. That failure to question, to investigate, to think critically, that was a judgment failure, Julian continued, one that cost me dearly. But I learned from it. I learned to trust my instincts over comfortable lies. I learned to value authenticity over appearance. And most importantly, I learned that blind ambition without personal connections creates the kind of hollowness that nearly killed me. He paused, looking around the table. I've been a machine for 8 years, efficient, profitable, completely devoted to this company. And what did it get me? A perforated ulcer, depression I wouldn't acknowledge, and a life so empty that I didn't care if I survived my own medical crisis. Is that the kind of leader you want? Someone so devoted to the bottom line that they destroy themselves? We want someone focused on the company, Trey said, not distracted by personal drama. Then you want the wrong thing, Julian said flatly. My father built Brennan Pharmaceuticals on the principle that pharmaceutical advancement should serve humanity. But you can't serve humanity if you've forgotten what it means to be human. You can't create life-saving drugs if you don't value life, including your own. Caroline Durst spoke up for the first time. Julian, I knew your father well. Can you honestly say Gerald would approve of this situation? Julian looked directly at her. Yes. My father believed in second chances, in forgiveness, in the idea that people deserve grace during impossible circumstances. He would have embraced Rhea and Mark. He would have told me that discovering I have a son is a gift, not a scandal. Easy to claim when he's not here to contradict you, Trey interjected. But I am, came a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see an elderly man in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse. Rhea didn't recognize him, but Julian's face transformed with shock and joy. Uncle Robert? Robert Brennan, Gerald's younger brother who'd been traveling abroad for years, rolled himself to the table with surprising strength. When I heard about this meeting, I took the first flight back. Trey, you're an opportunistic snake. Tori, you're a controlling manipulator. And this board is making a catastrophic mistake. Robert, Tori began. Shut up, Tori. I know what you did. Gerald told me before he died that he was worried about Julian being alone with you. He made me promise to intervene if you ever tried to control his life completely. Robert turned to the board. My brother built this company for his son, not for profit margins, though those came naturally when you do good work, for his son, to give Julian purpose and legacy and a way to change the world. He looked at Julian with clear affection. Discovering you have a child, choosing to claim him publicly despite potential backlash, that's exactly what Gerald would have done. And as for this young woman, he smiled at Rhea. Gerald believed that you were brilliant. He told me once that Julian would be lucky if you chose him, not the other way around. Sentiment doesn't run a company, Trey said, clearly frustrated that his ambush was being derailed. Neither does sociopathy, Robert shot back. Leadership requires humanity. Vision requires passion. Innovation requires the kind of love that makes you willing to fight for something beyond profit. He reached into his jacket and produced a document. Gerald left me 20% of company shares held in trust. I've maintained voting rights while traveling. I vote to keep Julian as CEO and to remove Trey Locke from the board for manipulative behavior and corporate backstabbing. The room erupted. Trey's face went red with fury. Tori looked like she'd been slapped. Other board members began arguing amongst themselves. Caroline Durst called for order. We need a formal vote. All in favor of maintaining Julian Brennan as CEO? Hands went up, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Robert's vote carried weight, and his endorsement had shifted the room's dynamic. When the count finished, it was 11-4 in Julian's favor. Motion carries, Carolyn said with satisfaction. Julian remains CEO. Now for the motion to remove Trey Locke. I resign, Trey said tightly. Effective immediately. This company deserves better than the melodrama it's become. He stood, gathering his materials. As he passed Julian's wheelchair, he leaned down to whisper something Rhea couldn't hear. Julian's expression didn't change, but his hand found hers and squeezed tightly. After Trey left, the meeting dissolved into conversations. Board members approached Julian, some offering congratulations, others asking questions about transition plans and Mark's potential role in the company someday. Mark stayed close to his father, overwhelmed but handling it with impressive maturity. When one board member asked him directly what he wanted to do when he grew up, he answered, "Biochemistry research, like my parents. I want to help develop treatments for diseases that don't have cures yet." The answer clearly impressed several people. Rhea watched her son shine in this moment, watched Julian's. Pride radiate as he introduced Mark properly to colleagues and felt the first real hope that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this chaos. Tori remained in her seat even as the room emptied. Finally, when only family remained, she spoke. "You've won," she said to Julian. I hope you're satisfied." "I didn't win anything," Julian replied tiredly. "I just refused to lose what matters. There's a difference." Tori's eyes moved to Mark, studying him with an expression that might have been regret or calculation. It was impossible to tell. "He looks like you, like Gerald." "He does," Julian agreed. "I suppose you expect me to accept this, to embrace her and play doting grandmother?" "I expect nothing from you," Julian said honestly. "But Mark is your grandson. If you want a relationship with him, you'll have to earn it. And that starts with apologizing to Rhea for what you did 8 years ago. Tori's face hardened. I won't apologize for protecting you. Then we have nothing more to discuss. Julian's voice was final. You can remain on the board if you behave professionally, but you're not part of our family anymore. That's the consequence of your choices. For the first time, Tori looked genuinely shaken. She stood slowly, gathering her things. As she passed Mark, she paused. Your grandfather would have loved you, she said quietly. Then she was gone. The silence after her departure felt massive. Julian sagged in his wheelchair, exhausted beyond words. Uncle Robert rolled over, placing a gentle hand on his nephew's shoulder. You did good, kid. Gerald would be proud. Thank you for coming, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. Family shows up, Robert said simply. He looked at Rhea and Mark. Even when it's complicated and messy and painful, family shows up. He smiled. Now, I think someone needs to get this man back to the hospital before he collapses from exhaustion. Dr. Amani materialized as if summoned, having been waiting outside. Already called for transport. Julian, you're going back to your room, you're going to rest, and you're going to stop trying to save the world for at least 24 hours. As they prepared to leave, Caroline Durst approached one more time. Julian, I hope you know that some of us voted for you not despite your family situation, but because of it. A man who can navigate this complexity with grace and courage is exactly the kind of leader we need. Back in Julian's hospital room, the three of them finally had privacy. Julian was fading fast, medication and exhaustion catching up, but he refused to sleep until they'd talked. I need you both to know something, he said seriously, looking between Rhea and Mark. What happened today? The board meeting, my mother, all of it. That's going to happen again in different forms. There are going to be people who judge us, who question Mark's legitimacy, who look down on Rhea for her choices. It's not going to be easy. I know, Rhea said quietly. Me too, Mark added. But I also need you to know that I choose this, Julian continued. I choose us. Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face, I'm all in. Rhea, I love you. I'm angry and hurt about the years we lost, but I love you. And Mark, his voice broke. I've only known you for hours, but you're already one of the most important people in my life. I want to be your father in every way that matters. You already are, Mark said, and Julian pulled him into a careful hug. When they separated, Julian looked at Rhea with an expression that mixed love and pain and hope. We have a lot to work through, a lot of conversations to have, a lot of healing to do. I know, she said, and I'm ready. For all of it. Julian held out his hand and she took it. Mark's hand joined theirs, the three of them connected for the first time as a complete family. So what happens now? Mark asked. Julian smiled despite his exhaustion. Now we figure out how to be a family, how to build something real from all this chaos. He looked at Rhea. Starting with a proper date, once I'm out of this hospital, I'm taking you somewhere nice, somewhere we can talk without interruptions or medical equipment or corporate drama. I'd like that, Rhea said softly. And Mark, I want you to see the labs at Brennan Pharmaceuticals, meet the researchers, see what we're working on. Maybe shadow some scientists if you're interested. Really? Mark's face lit up. Really, you're my son. This is your legacy too, if you want it. As Julian finally surrendered to sleep, his hand still holding Rhea's, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 years, genuine hope. They had survived the worst. The secrets were out, the battles were fought, and they were still standing. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more people to face, more healing required. But for the first time since she was 24 years old, Rhea believed they might actually make it. She looked at Mark, who'd fallen asleep in the chair beside Julian's bed, and at Julian, whose face had finally relaxed into peaceful sleep. Her family. Broken and complicated and absolutely real. Tomorrow would bring new complications, but tonight, for just this moment, they had peace. Chapter 3. 3 months had passed since the board meeting that changed everything. Julian stood at the window of his father's estate, watching the autumn sun paint the gardens in shades of gold and amber. His reflection in the glass showed a man transformed, healthier, with color back in his face and weight returned to his frame. The ulcers had healed. The bleeding had stopped, both literal and metaphorical. Behind him, he could hear Mark's laughter mixing with Ria's voice as they worked together in the kitchen, attempting to make dinner. It was a Saturday ritual they'd established. Weekends at the estate, away from the city's pressure, learning how to be a family. The past 3 months had been complicated, beautiful and painful and messy and worth every difficult moment. Julian had been released from the hospital after 4 days, against medical advice but with strict orders for rest and dietary changes. He'd moved Ria and Mark into the estate immediately, refusing to waste another day living separately. The gossip had been immediate and vicious. Tabloids ran stories about the secret love child. Society pages speculated about his judgment. Competitors whispered about instability. Julian had ignored all of it. Instead, he'd focused on building something real with his son and the woman he'd never stopped loving. They'd attended family therapy, all 3 of them, working through years of pain and separation with a professional who specialized in complex family dynamics. It had been brutal at times, especially the sessions where Mark confronted Ria about growing up fatherless, or when Julian expressed the depth of his grief over lost years. But they'd pushed through, because the alternative, losing each other again, was unthinkable. "Dad," Mark's voice called from the kitchen, "Mom says you're not allowed to work this weekend. Get in here and help us not burn the chicken." Dad. The word still hit Julian with surprising force every time Mark used it. At 13, Mark had taken to calling him Dad naturally, as if they'd been father and son from the beginning. Julian had cried the first time, actual tears in front of his teenager, and Mark had hugged him without embarrassment. Julian turned from the window and headed to the kitchen, where organized chaos reigned. Ria stood at the stove, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that reminded him of their laboratory days, wearing one of his old shirts over jeans. She looked more beautiful than memory, more real, more present, more his. She'd quit her janitorial job the day after the board meeting. Julian had wanted to offer her a position at Brennan Pharmaceuticals immediately, but Ria had refused. "I need to finish my doctorate first," she'd said firmly. "I won't work for you until I've earned credentials on my own merit." So Julian had used his connections to get her reinstated at the university, with full scholarship and stipend. She'd started classes 6 weeks ago, diving back into biochemistry research with the passion he remembered. Her advisor had been shocked by her knowledge. Years of independent study had kept her sharp despite the interrupted education. Mark was experimenting with a marinade, consulting his phone for recipes with the focused intensity he brought to all scientific endeavors. He'd started spending weekends in the Brennan Pharmaceuticals labs, shadowing researchers and asking questions that made PhD-level scientists pause and think. Several had commented to Julian that his son had extraordinary potential. "What can I do?" Julian asked, slipping his arms around Ria's waist from behind. She leaned back against him. Automatically, the physical comfort between them, now as natural as breathing. "Watch the vegetables while I check the chicken," she directed, "and stop distracting me with the touching." "Never," he murmured against her ear, making her shiver. "Gross," Mark commented without heat, grinning at them. "Old people, romance is weird." "We're 32 and 35, Ria protested. "That's not old." "To me it is." Mark's smile was teasing. He'd grown more confident over the past 3 months, his personality blossoming now that he didn't carry the weight of being the fatherless kid. He still had moments of insecurity, still sometimes asked questions that revealed lingering hurt about the lost years, but overall, he was thriving. They worked together to finish dinner, the conversation flowing easily between science, school gossip, and company updates. This was Julian's favorite part of every week, the mundane domesticity he'd thought he'd never have. Cooking meals, helping with homework, debating everything from quantum mechanics to whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Over dinner, Mark brought up the science fair at school. "I want to do a project on protein synthesis," he announced. "Something that builds on your research, Dad. The work you and Mom were doing before—" He stopped, suddenly uncertain. "Before my mother destroyed everything," Julian finished gently. "It's okay to acknowledge it, Mark. Pretending it didn't happen doesn't make it hurt less." I just don't want to make things weird, Mark admitted. It's already weird, Rhea said with a slight smile. We're a family built from broken pieces and second chances. Weird is our normal now. Julian reached across the table, taking both their hands. Your project sounds brilliant. I'd be honored to help, and I'm sure your mom has ideas too. Rhea's eyes lit up, the same way they used to in the lab when she got excited about breakthrough possibilities. Actually, I've been thinking about this. What if we approached protein synthesis from a different angle? Instead of focusing on speed, we focus on accuracy, reduce error rates that lead to disease expression. And just like that, they were off, all three of them talking over each other with ideas and theories and possibilities. This was what Julian had missed most during the years without Rhea, having a partner who could match his intellect, challenge his assumptions, push him to think differently. Having a son who could keep up with both of them was an unexpected gift. After dinner, Mark retreated to his room to video chat with friends, leaving Julian and Rhea alone for the first time all day. They settled on the couch in the library, Julian's favorite room in the estate, filled with his father's books and the comfortable furniture that held 1,000 memories. Rhea curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just existing together. These quiet moments had become precious. Time to simply be, without having to explain or defend or justify their relationship to anyone. I got a call from Tori today, Julian said eventually. Rhea stiffened. What did she want? To meet Mark, properly. She asked if she could take him to lunch next weekend. In 3 months, Tori had maintained a careful distance. She'd remained on the board, but stopped interfering in Julian's personal life. No more manipulation, no more threats, no more schemes. Julian wasn't naive enough to think she'd changed fundamentally, but she'd at least recognized when she'd lost. What did you tell her? Rhea asked carefully. That it's Mark's decision. If he wants to know his grandmother, I won't stop him, but I also won't force it. She terrifies him. She terrifies everyone, Julian agreed, but she's also the only grandparent he has. My father's gone, and from what you've told me, your parents passed when you were young. Rhea nodded. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, leaving her to care for her younger sister alone. That loss had made Tori's threats about her sister's transplant even more devastating. Her sister was the only family she'd had left. How is Sarah doing? Julian asked, following the thought. Rhea's sister had been living in Oregon for the past 5 years, her transplanted kidney still functioning well. She'd been shocked to learn Rhea was alive and reconnected with Julian, and had flown out immediately to meet her brother-in-law and nephew. Good. She's talking about visiting for Thanksgiving. Rhea smiled. She really likes you, you know. Said I was an idiot for staying away so long. You were protecting yourself and Mark, Julian said, tilting her face up to look at him. I understand that now. It doesn't mean I'm not angry about the lost time, but I understand it. They'd had this conversation in various forms dozens of times over the past 3 months, processing trauma, working through betrayal, rebuilding trust. It was ongoing work, not a one-time fix, but each conversation brought them closer to genuine healing. I love you, Rhea said quietly, in case I haven't mentioned it today. You have, but I never get tired of hearing it. Julian kissed her softly, savoring the taste and feel of her. 3 months in, and he still sometimes woke in the night, terrified she'd disappeared again, that this was all an elaborate dream his broken mind had constructed. But then, she'd be there, warm and solid beside him, and reality would reassert itself. She was here. She was real. She was his. The kiss deepened, years of longing compressed into present connection. Rhea's hands threaded through his hair, pulling him closer. Julian shifted her onto his lap, mindful of his still healing surgical scar, but unwilling to break contact. Mark's upstairs, Rhea murmured against his lips. I know, Julian acknowledged, though it didn't stop him from trailing kisses down her neck, which is why this is as far as we're going tonight. They'd been intimate twice since his hospital release, once in a moment of overwhelming emotion, once more deliberately as they worked to rebuild physical connection. Both times had been powerful, healing, transformative, but they'd also agreed to be cautious, to let their physical relationship rebuild naturally rather than rushing. Still, the wanting was constant. Julian craved her touch the way other people craved air. Soon, Rhea promised, as if reading his thoughts, when we're not so emotionally fragile, when it won't feel like we're trying to erase the past instead of building a future. You're very wise, Julian said, forcing himself to release her. One of us has to be, she teased, settling back against his side. You have a tendency toward dramatic gestures and emotional intensity. I prefer to think of it as passion. That too. They talked late into the night, covering everything and nothing. Mark's progress in school, Rhea's research, Julian's plans for the company, upcoming holidays, dreams for the future. Eventually, Rhea fell asleep against him, her breathing evening out into the rhythm he'd memorized. Julian stayed awake a while longer, content to hold her and think about how close he'd come to losing all of this. If he'd died from that bleeding ulcer, he never would have known about Mark, never would have reconciled with Rhea, never would have experienced this quiet joy that came from building a life with the people you loved. His phone buzzed with a message from Uncle Robert. Thanksgiving at my place. Bring your family, and that means all three of you. Julian smiled. Family. He had that now. After 8 years of isolation and grief, he had a family again. He glanced at the coffee table where a small velvet box sat hidden beneath a stack of books. He'd bought it 2 weeks ago, unable to wait any longer. Inside was a ring, understated elegance with a single diamond, chosen because Rhea had once mentioned in their laboratory days that she thought flashy jewelry was impractical. He'd been carrying it around ever since, waiting for the perfect moment to propose. But perfect moments, he was learning, didn't exist. Life was messy and complicated and beautiful precisely because it refused to conform to expectations. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for perfect and simply choose now. The following Saturday, Julian asked Rhea to take a walk with him through the estate gardens. It was early November, the air crisp but not yet bitter, leaves crunching underfoot. Mark had stayed behind, supposedly working on his science fair project, but really giving his parents privacy after Julian had nervously asked for time alone with Rhea. You're nervous, Rhea observed as they walked. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Julian said, his hand tightening around hers. Actually, everything is extraordinarily right, which is what I want to talk about. They'd reached his father's favorite spot, a bench overlooking a small pond surrounded by trees that were now bare except for the most stubborn leaves. Julian had spent hours here after Gerald's death, trying to figure out how to survive the loss. Now he was back with Rhea, preparing to build a future his father would have celebrated. Sit with me, he said, guiding her to the bench. Rhea settled beside him, her expression curious but not alarmed. The late afternoon sun caught the highlights in her hair, making her look luminous. Julian took a moment to simply appreciate her, this woman who'd survived so much, who'd raised their son alone, who'd been brave enough to come back despite all the risks. 8 years ago, he began, I lost you, or I thought I did. And in losing you, I lost myself. I became this hollow thing that looked like a successful CEO but felt like nothing inside. I worked and worked and worked because if I stopped, I'd have to face the emptiness. Rhea started to speak, but he gently touched her lips. Let me finish. When you came back, when I saw you in that doorway covered in my blood, I thought I was hallucinating. The grief and pain and longing I'd been suppressing for 8 years crashed through all at once. And then I learned about Mark, and it was like being given everything I'd lost, and more. A second chance I didn't deserve, but desperately wanted. He pulled the velvet box from his pocket, and Rhea's breath caught. These past 3 months have been the happiest of my life, Julian continued. Not because they've been easy, they haven't, but because they've been real. Messy and complicated and absolutely genuine. You, me, Mark. We're building something that matters, a family, a future, a life I actually want to wake up for every morning. He opened the box, revealing the ring. Rhea Kingsley, I loved you when we were young and foolish in a laboratory at 2 a.m. I loved you through 8 years of grief when I thought you were gone. I love you now, with full knowledge of every mistake and choice and moment of fear that brought us here. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner in every sense? In research, in parenting, in life? Will you trust me enough to build a future together?" Tears streamed down Ria's face. "Julian, I know it's fast," he continued. "I know we're still working through complex trauma. I know there are probably a dozen reasons why we should wait. But I also know that I've already lost 8 years with you, and I don't want to waste another day pretending I'm not completely, irrevocably committed to you and Mark. So yes, it's fast, but it's also inevitable." "You're right," Ria said, her voice shaking. "It is fast and complicated, and probably inadvisable by every conventional measure." Julian's heart sank. But yes," she interrupted, laughing through tears. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it. The partnership, the future, the mess and beauty of building a life together. Yes." Julian pulled her into his arms, the ring box still clutched in one hand. She was crying, he was crying, and it was perfect in its imperfection. When they pulled apart enough to breathe, he carefully removed the ring and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the fading sunlight. "I was so afraid you'd say no," he admitted. "I've loved you for 13 years, Ria said, "through separation and silence and every impossible circumstance. Why would I say no to actually getting to be with you? Because I'm intense and demanding and probably too emotionally invested too quickly?" "All true," she agreed, kissing him softly. "And I love you anyway." They sat on the bench as the sun set, holding each other and planning a future they'd both thought was impossible. "Small wedding," Ria insisted. "Just family and close friends. Mark as best man, Sarah as maid of honor, Uncle Robert officiating if he was willing. Simple and genuine, focused on commitment rather than spectacle." "We should tell Mark," Julian said as darkness gathered. "He already knows," came their son's voice from behind them. They turned to find Mark standing a few feet away, grinning widely. "I heard everything. The acoustics by the pond are really good." "You were spying?" Ria asked, though she didn't sound upset. "I was making sure Dad didn't screw it up," Mark corrected, approaching them. "This is excellent news, by the way. I was worried you'd wait forever to make it official." Julian stood and pulled Mark into a hug. "Your approval matters. I should have asked you first if you were okay with this." "Dad, I've been waiting my whole life for this," Mark said seriously. "For us to be a real family. Of course I'm okay with it." The three of them walked back to the house together, Ria's hand in Julian's, Mark walking beside them. As they approached the lit windows, Julian felt a profound sense of completeness. This was what he'd been bleeding for all those years, not the company, not success, not validation. This connection, this family, this love. Inside, they found Uncle Robert sitting in the library, looking pleased with himself. "About time," he said when he saw Ria's ring. "Gerald bet me you two would end up married someday. Nice to know my brother's instincts were solid." "You knew?" Julian asked, stunned. "Of course I knew. Gerald talked about Ria constantly. Said she was the smartest person in any room, including you. Said if you were lucky enough to win her heart, you'd better not screw it up." Robert's expression grew somber. He'd be devastated to know what Tori did, but he'd be thrilled to see you all together now. "I wish he could have met Mark," Julian said quietly. "He would have loved him," Robert agreed, looking at his great-nephew with clear affection. "The kid's got Gerald's curiosity and your intensity. Dangerous combination." They celebrated with sparkling cider and takeout pizza. Nothing fancy, just family being together. Uncle Robert told stories about Gerald and Tori's early years, painting a picture of his brother that Julian had never fully seen. A man who'd married for appropriate reasons rather than love, who'd found purpose in his work when his marriage grew cold, who'd dreamed of his son finding the passion he himself had missed. "Your father's greatest regret," Robert told Julian, "was that he never had the courage to leave your mother. He stayed for appearances, for the company, for you. But he made me promise that if I ever saw you making the same mistake, choosing duty over love, I'd intervene." "Is that why you came back for the board meeting?" Ria asked. "Partly. But mostly I came back because family shows up when it matters." Robert raised his glass. "To second chances, to courage, to building the life you actually want instead of the life others expect." They toasted, and Julian felt the past's weight finally lifting. He'd spent 8 years carrying guilt and grief like penance. But maybe the real tribute to his father wasn't suffering. It was choosing joy, building family, living fully. The next few weeks passed in a blur of wedding planning and holiday preparation. Rhea insisted on waiting until after she'd completed her fall semester before the wedding, wanting to approach marriage from a position of established independence rather than dependence. Julian agreed, though waiting felt almost painful after they'd already lost so much time. Thanksgiving arrived with a house full of family. Uncle Robert hosted at his sprawling home, where Sarah and her husband joined them, along with Dr. Imani and her family, and several Brennan Pharmaceuticals employees who'd become genuine friends over the years. Even Angela Price appeared, having stayed friendly with Julian after their broken engagement. "I'm happy for you," Angela told him privately. "Really, you look alive again." "I am alive again," Julian agreed. "Thank you for understanding." "I always understood," she said simply. "You can't compete with the kind of love you have with Rhea. I wouldn't want to." The only person missing was Tori. Julian had extended an invitation out of obligation, but she'd declined. "I'll attend the wedding," she'd said stiffly, "but I need time to adjust to this new reality." Mark had declined her lunch invitation, telling Julian simply, "Maybe someday, but not yet. She hurt you and Mom too much. I'm not ready to pretend that's okay." Julian had been secretly relieved, though he told Mark the door remained open if he changed his mind. At dinner, Uncle Robert stood to make a toast. "I'd like to share something Gerald told me shortly before he died," he said. "Robert, I've built a successful company and accumulated more money than I'll ever spend. But my greatest achievement will be if Julian learns from my mistakes. If he chooses love over duty, passion over appearances, real connection over convenient arrangements. He saw that potential in you, Julian, even when you were young." Robert's eyes grew misty. "Gerald would be so proud, not of the company or the money or the success. Proud that you found Rhea again. Proud that you claimed your son without shame. Proud that you're building the life he always wished he'd had the courage to build himself." The table fell silent, everyone processing this revelation. Then Mark spoke up, his young voice carrying unexpected wisdom. "I wish I could have known him, Grandpa Gerald, but I know him through Dad, through the company he built and the values he passed down, and through the fact that Dad chose us over everything else, just like Grandpa would have wanted." Julian couldn't speak around the emotion in his throat. Rhea's hand found his under the table, grounding him. Their son had just articulated something profound. That legacy wasn't about what you built, but about the values you passed on. After dinner, as people mingled and Mark played chess with Uncle Robert, Julian pulled Rhea onto the back porch for privacy. "I want to move the wedding up," he said without preamble. "I know you wanted to wait until after fall semester, but that's 3 more weeks. I don't want to wait anymore." Rhea studied his face in the dim porch light. "What brought this on?" "Mark's toast, Uncle Robert's story. The realization that life is fragile and time is precious, and we've already wasted too much of it." He cupped her face in his hands. "I want to marry you now, this weekend. Small ceremony, just us and Mark and Uncle Robert and whoever else can make it on short notice. Nothing fancy, just commitment and love and starting our actual life together." "That's insane," Rhea said. "Probably. And impractical." "Definitely. And exactly what I want, too," she finished, her face breaking into a radiant smile. "Yes, let's do it. Let's get married this weekend and stop waiting for our life to begin." They kissed on the porch, while inside, their family celebrated, unaware that the wedding timeline had just dramatically accelerated. When they returned inside and announced the change, the response was enthusiastic chaos. "This weekend?" Sarah squealed. "That's 3 days away." "We'll make it work," Imani said firmly, already pulling out her phone to make lists. "Simple ceremony, right? How hard can it be?" "Famous last words," Angela murmured, but she was smiling. For the next 3 days, people rallied to make the impossible happen. The ceremony would be at the estate, in the same garden where Julian had proposed. Uncle Robert agreed to officiate, having gotten ordained online years ago for a friend's wedding. Sarah handled flowers, simple arrangements of late autumn blooms. Imani coordinated food, enlisting her husband's catering connections. Angela, surprisingly, offered to handle the legal paperwork and marriage license logistics. Mark took his best man duties seriously, writing a speech and choosing his outfit with meticulous care. "This has to be perfect," he told Julian earnestly. "It's not just your wedding, it's when we officially become a family. That's important." The night before the wedding, Julian couldn't sleep. He found Mark still awake, sitting in the library and staring at his speech notes. "Nervous?" Julian asked, settling beside his son. "Terrified," Mark admitted. "What if I mess up my speech?" "Then you mess it up and we all love you anyway." Julian put his arm around Mark's shoulders. "That's what family means." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Mark spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you ever wish it had been different? That you'd known about me from the beginning?" Julian took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "Yes and no. Yes, I wish I'd been there for your first words, your first steps, every birthday and milestone. I'll always carry sadness about missing those years. But no, I don't wish the circumstances were different, because those circumstances created the exact person you are now. And Mark, you're extraordinary, smart and kind and mature beyond your years. Would you be that same person if you'd grown up with all the privilege and pressure of being a Brennan from birth?" "I don't know. Maybe, but maybe not." Mark was quiet, processing. "So you're saying the hard stuff made me who I am?" "I'm saying that trauma doesn't define us, but it shapes us. Your mom raised you alone with limited resources, and that taught you resilience and empathy. You grew up without knowing your father, and that taught you to value family when you finally found it. None of it was fair or right, but it made you the remarkable person sitting beside me right now." "I like how you make sad things sound not sad," Mark said. Julian laughed. "That's called reframing, and it's a survival skill. Your mom taught me that, finding ways to look at situations from angles that don't destroy you." "She's good at that," Mark agreed. Then, hesitantly, "Are you scared? About tomorrow?" "Terrified," Julian admitted. "Not about marrying your mom, that's the easiest decision I've ever made, but about somehow screwing this up, about not being the father you deserve or the husband she needs, about all my intensity and emotional baggage weighing us all down." "You're already the father I deserve," Mark said firmly. "You showed up. You claimed me publicly even when it would have been easier not to. You chose us over everything else. That's all I ever wanted." The simple statement broke something open in Julian's chest. He pulled Mark close, and they sat like that until Mark's breathing evened out into sleep. Julian carried his 13-year-old son to bed, tucking him in like he'd missed doing for so many years, and returned to his own room, where Rhea was supposedly sleeping separately for tradition's sake. She wasn't there, of course. He found her in his room, sitting on his bed in one of his shirts, looking nervous. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Kept thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong." Julian sat beside her, taking her hand. "Name one. Your mother could show up and cause a scene. Uncle Robert hired private security. She's not getting in without an invitation. I could trip walking down the aisle. There's no aisle. We're standing in a circle. I could forget my vows. We're speaking from the heart, not from memorization." Rhea smiled despite her anxiety. "You have an answer for everything." "That's my job, solving problems." He kissed her softly. "But here's the truth. Something will probably go wrong tomorrow. Someone might flub their lines, or the weather might not cooperate, or the food might be late. And none of it will matter, because at the end of the day, we'll be married. Officially, legally, completely. That's all I care about." "When did you get so wise?" she asked. "When I realized that perfection is the enemy of happiness. Perfect moments don't exist. But real moments, messy, complicated, beautiful moments, those are everywhere if you're brave enough to embrace them." They fell asleep tangled together, tradition abandoned in favor of comfort. And when Julian woke the next morning, the day of his wedding, Rhea was still there, solid and real and his. The wedding day was unseasonably warm for late November, as if nature itself had decided to cooperate. The garden had been simply decorated, white chairs in a circle around the spot where Julian had proposed, late autumn flowers mixed with evergreen branches, lanterns hung in trees for the evening ceremony. Julian stood at his spot in the circle, Uncle Robert beside him in his capacity as officiant, Mark on his other side looking handsome and nervous in a suit they'd chosen together. The assembled guests, maybe 30 people total, sat watching with warm anticipation. Then Rhea appeared, and everything else ceased to matter. She'd chosen a simple dress, ivory silk that flowed to her ankles, with delicate embroidery at the neckline. Her hair was down, natural curls framing her face. No veil, no elaborate accessories, just Rhea, radiant and beautiful, and walking toward him with tears already flowing. Sarah walked beside her, having stepped in to give her sister away since their parents were gone. When they reached the circle, Sarah kissed Rhea's cheek and whispered something that made Rhea laugh through tears, then took her seat. Rhea stepped into the circle, taking Julian's outstretched hands. He was crying too, completely unbothered by the tears streaming down his face in front of everyone they loved. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he whispered back. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we're gathered here because these two stubborn people finally figured out what the rest of us have known for years. They belong together." Gentle laughter rippled through the circle. "Julian and Rhea have written their own vows," Robert continued. "Julian, you're up first." Julian took a steadying breath, his hands tightening on Rhea's. "Rhea, 8 years ago I thought I lost you forever. In that loss, I lost myself, became this hollow machine that went through motions without feeling anything real. And then, in the most unexpected moment, you came back. You were there when I was bleeding and broken, and you've been here every day since, helping me remember how to be fully human again." He paused, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "You gave me a son I never knew existed, a brilliant, kind, extraordinary son who reminds me every day what matters. You gave me a second chance at a life I thought was over. But most importantly, you showed me that love doesn't die just because circumstances change. That real love survives separation and mistakes and impossible obstacles." Tears were flowing freely now, but Julian pushed on. "I promise to spend every day for the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of that love. I promise to be the partner you deserve, supporting your dreams, celebrating your brilliance, standing beside you through every challenge. I promise to be the father Mark deserves, to make up for lost time however I can. And I promise to never again let duty or fear or other people's expectations come between us and the life we want to build together." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing them gently. "You are my redemption, my partner, my home. I love you with everything I am and everything I'll ever be." Rhea was sobbing openly now. She took a shaky breath, trying to compose herself enough to speak. "Julian," she began, her voice trembling, "I have made so many mistakes in my life. I took money when I should have fought back. I disappeared when I should have trusted you. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. For 8 years, I've carried the weight of those choices, knowing I'd hurt you in ways I could never fully repair." She squeezed his hands. "But standing here today, I finally understand something. We weren't meant to have a perfect love story. We were meant to have a real one, one with mistakes and consequences and hard choices made from impossible positions. One with long separations and painful reunions and complicated healing. Because that's what real love looks like. Not perfection, but persistence. Not ease, but dedication. Not fantasy, but reality in all its messy beauty." Her voice grew stronger. "I promise to never hide from you again. Not my fears, not my mistakes, not any part of myself. I promise to trust you with our family's future. To let you be the partner I should have always allowed you to be. I promise to build a life with you that honors both the pain of our past and the hope of our future. And I promise to remind you every single day that you were worth every sacrifice, every hard choice, every moment of loneliness, because you, Julian Brennan, are the greatest love of my life." She smiled through tears. "You're also the father of our remarkable son, my intellectual equal, and the only person who's ever truly seen me, all of me, including the broken parts, and loved me anyway. I love you. I've loved you since I was 24 years old, and I'll love you until I stop breathing." There wasn't a dry eye in the circle. Even Uncle Robert was blinking rapidly, trying to maintain his composure enough to continue the ceremony. "Well," Robert said, his voice rough, I think we can all agree those vows were completely inadequate. Neither of you mentioned the other's cooking skills or taste in music or any of the practical things that really matter in marriage. More laughter, breaking the emotional intensity just enough to let everyone breathe. Do you, Julian Alexander Brennan, take this remarkable woman to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? I do, Julian said without hesitation. And do you, Rhea Marie Kingsley, take this occasionally dramatic but deeply loving man to be your husband? Same terms, sickness, health, richer, poorer, better, worse, forever? I do, Rhea said, smiling. Then, by the power vested in me by the internet and the state of— actually, I'm not sure I'm supposed to specify the state. Let's just say by the power vested in me by love and stubbornness, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Julian, you may kiss your bride. Finally. We've all been waiting 8 years for this. Julian pulled Rhea into his arms and kissed her with every ounce of love and passion and desperate gratitude he felt. She kissed him back the same way, and their guests erupted in applause and cheers. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and radiant, Mark appeared beside them. "Can I say my speech now?" he asked. "Please do," Robert agreed, stepping aside. Mark cleared his throat, suddenly looking very young and nervous. "Hi, I'm Mark. I'm the reason these two couldn't get married 8 years ago like they should have." He paused while people laughed gently. "I'm kidding, kind of. But seriously, I've spent my whole life wondering about my dad. Who he was, what he was like, why he wasn't around. And Mom always told me he was a good man, that he'd love me if he knew about me, that the only reason we weren't together was complicated grown-up stuff I'd understand when I was older." He looked at Julian and Rhea. "Now I'm older, and I do understand. And I just want to say, to both of you, thank you. Thank you for fighting for this family even when it was hard. Thank you for being honest about the mess and the mistakes, instead of pretending everything was always perfect. And thank you for showing me that love is about choosing each other every day, even when it would be easier not to." Mark's voice cracked. "I have a dad now, and I have parents who love each other, and that's—" He stopped, overcome with emotion. Julian pulled Mark into a hug, and Rhea joined them, the three of them holding each other while their witnesses cried happily. When they finally separated, Mark finished his speech. "So I guess what I'm saying is, congratulations on finally making this official. Welcome to the family, Dad. I'm really glad you're here." The simple words carried more weight than any elaborate toast could have managed. Julian looked at his son, his brilliant, compassionate, extraordinary son, and felt his heart might actually burst from fullness. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of celebration. Dinner was served under lights strung through the garden trees. Toasts were made, Sarah talking about Rhea's years of quiet suffering and louder joy, Dr. Amani sharing stories of late-night encouragement and stubborn hope, even Angela offering surprisingly touching words about watching Julian come back to life. There was dancing, Julian and Rhea's first dance as a married couple to a song from their laboratory days, Julian and Mark's father-son dance that left everyone emotional. Even Rhea and Mark dancing together while Julian watched and tried not to cry again. As evening turned to night and guests gradually departed, Julian found himself alone with Rhea on the same bench where he'd proposed. Mark was inside with Uncle Robert, having fallen asleep during a conversation about chess strategies. The garden was quiet except for autumn wind through bare trees and the distant sound of someone cleaning up. "We did it," Rhea said softly, her head on his shoulder. "We actually did it. Did you doubt we would?" "Maybe a little. So much has gone wrong in our story. It seemed almost too good to be true that we'd actually get our happy ending." Julian tilted her face up to look at him. "This isn't our ending. It's our beginning. Everything before was prologue. Painful, complicated prologue. But now we get to actually live." He kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. "I love you, Mrs. Brennan. I love you too, Mr. Brennan." They sat in contented silence, watching the moon rise over the garden where they'd committed their lives to each other. Inside the house, their son slept safe and loved. Uncle Robert was probably working on wedding photos and already planning holidays. Sarah had promised to visit more often, Even Tori, in her own twisted way, had acknowledged the marriage by sending an expensive gift without commentary. Life wasn't perfect. They still had work to do. Ria's doctorate to complete, Mark's adolescence to navigate, company challenges to face, probably more conflict with Tori down the line. But they'd face all of it together, as partners and parents and people who'd survived enough to know that love was worth fighting for. "What are you thinking?" Ria asked. "That I'm the luckiest man alive," Julian answered honestly. "That I was bleeding for 8 years and didn't even realize it was fatal until you came back and gave me a reason to heal. That sometimes the greatest gifts come from the worst circumstances, Mark being the perfect example." He paused, struggling to articulate the profound gratitude filling him. "I'm thinking that if I could go back and change the past, if I could erase your pain or give Mark his father from birth or avoid all the trauma, I'm not sure I would. Because that pain made us who we are. It taught us what matters. It gave us the strength to build something real instead of something comfortable." "That's very philosophical for a biochemist," Ria teased gently. "I'm a man who almost died and got a second chance," Julian countered. "That tends to make you philosophical." They stayed on the bench until the cold drove them inside, where warmth and light and their sleeping son waited. As they walked through the garden together, Julian looked back at the spot where they'd married and felt his father's presence, not grief this time, but approval and joy. Gerald Brennan had wanted his son to choose love over duty, passion over appearances, real connection over convenient arrangements. Julian had done exactly that, and in doing so, he'd found not just survival, but genuine happiness. The bleeding had stopped, the healing had begun, and the life they'd thought was impossible was finally beautifully real. 6 months later, Julian stood in the laboratory at Brennan Pharmaceuticals watching Ria explain her latest research findings to a room full of skeptical scientists. She'd completed her doctorate 3 months ago, graduating top of her program, and Julian had immediately hired her as director of advanced research. Some board members had questioned the nepotism, but one look at her credentials and innovative work had silenced most critics. Those who remained critical were quickly converted after Ria's first presentation. She was brilliant, always had been, and now she had the platform and resources to prove it. Mark sat in the back of the room, taking notes. At 14, he was officially a summer intern at Brennan Pharmaceuticals, the youngest person ever admitted to the program. He'd won his school science fair with the protein synthesis project, and the research had caught the attention of several universities already talking to him about early admission programs. Julian felt absurdly proud of both of them, his wife, his son, his family. After the presentation, as scientists crowded around Ria with questions and Mark debated methodology with people 3 times his age, Dr. Amani appeared at Julian's elbow. "Look at you," she said with satisfaction. "Healthy, happy, whole. Remember 6 months ago when you were bleeding out in your office?" "I remember," Julian said quietly. "I remember thinking I was hallucinating when I saw Ria. I remember not caring if I died because what was the point of surviving in a world without her? And now? Now I have everything to live for." He watched Ria laugh at something Mark said, her hand unconsciously resting on her still flat stomach where their second child was growing. A daughter, according to the ultrasound last week. "Now I understand what my father meant about real success." Uncle Robert joined them, looking pleased. "Gerald would be insufferable if he were here," he commented. "Would absolutely gloat about being right about Ria." "He was right about everything," Julian agreed. "Except one thing." "What's that?" "He thought choosing love over duty meant giving up success, but it doesn't. It means redefining what success looks like." Julian gestured around the lab, state-of-the-art equipment, brilliant minds working on breakthrough treatments, a company culture that valued both profit and compassion. "Brennan Pharmaceuticals is more successful now than it's ever been, not because I became more ruthless, but because I became more human, because I let myself care about things beyond the bottom line." "Inspirational speech," Amani teased. "You practicing for shareholders' meeting?" "Maybe," Julian admitted with a smile. The truth was, everything had changed when he'd stopped bleeding. His health had recovered, but more importantly, his perspective had shifted. He still worked hard, still cared about the company, still pushed for excellence. But now he left at reasonable hours. Now he prioritized family dinner and Mark's basketball games and date nights with Rhea. Now he measured success not just in profits and breakthroughs, but in laughter and connection and moments of genuine joy. The board had initially worried this softer approach would weaken the company. Instead, it had strengthened it. Employees were more productive when leadership valued work-life balance. Innovation flourished when people weren't burned out and miserable. Retention improved when staff felt like humans rather than resources. Who knew that basic human decency made good business sense? Rhea finished her presentation and crossed the room to Julian, slipping her hand into his with the ease of daily habit. "What did you think?" "I think you're extraordinary," he said honestly. "I think you're going to revolutionize protein synthesis research, and I'm honored to provide the resources you need to do it." Flatterer, truth teller. He kissed her softly, unbothered by their professional setting or the people watching. After hiding their relationship for so long, after years of separation and secrecy, he refused to pretend their love was anything other than central to who he was. Mark appeared, bouncing with excitement. "Mom, Dr. Chen wants to talk about extending my internship through the school year. Can I? Please?" Rhea looked at Julian, who shrugged. "It's your decision. You're his mother." "We're both his parents," she corrected, "so we decide together." It was a small moment, but it represented something profound, the equal partnership they'd built, where neither person dominated and both voices mattered. They'd worked hard in therapy to establish these patterns, to undo the damage of years where Rhea had made all decisions alone and Julian had made none. "I think it's fine," Julian said. "As long as grades don't suffer and you're still playing basketball, balance, remember?" "Balance," Mark agreed, though his grin suggested he'd spend every free moment in the lab, if allowed. After work, they drove home together. Rhea in the passenger seat, Mark in the back, all three of them talking about the day. Home wasn't the estate anymore. They'd moved to a house that was theirs rather than Julian's family legacy. Smaller, warmer, filled with Mark's basketball trophies and Rhea's books and evidence of actual living rather than museum-perfect decoration. Over dinner, pizza, because it was Friday and nobody felt like cooking, they discussed weekend plans. Uncle Robert had invited them to a beach house for a few days. Sarah was visiting with her family. Even Tori had reached out tentatively, asking if she might stop by Sunday afternoon. Mark had finally agreed to give his grandmother a chance, though on his own terms. 1 hour, he'd told Julian, and Mom and Dad have to be there, and if she says anything mean, I'm leaving. Fair enough. "You know what today is?" Rhea asked as they cleaned up after dinner. Julian thought for a moment. 6 months since the wedding? Close. It's exactly 1 year since you collapsed in your office and I couldn't stay hidden anymore. 1 year. Julian thought about who he'd been then, slowly killing himself with work and stress, bleeding internally while pretending everything was fine, convinced that the woman he loved was dead and gone forever. That man felt like a stranger now. "Best collapse of my life," he said lightly. "That's morbid," Mark commented, "but accurate." Julian pulled Rhea close, his hand resting on her stomach where their daughter grew. 1 year ago, I thought my life was over. Turns out it was just beginning. Later, after Mark went to bed and they were alone in their room, Rhea said quietly, "I'm still sorry, you know, for the years we lost, for keeping Mark from you, for all of it." They'd had versions of this conversation regularly over the past year. Julian suspected they'd have it many more times. Processing trauma wasn't linear, and grief for lost time resurfaced in cycles. "I know," he said gently, pulling her against him. "And I forgive you. Every day, I forgive you. Not because what happened doesn't matter, but because holding on to anger doesn't change the past. It only poisons the present." "When did you get so emotionally mature?" she asked, when I realized that resentment was just another way of bleeding. And I'm done bleeding. He kissed her forehead. "Besides, how can I stay angry when I have everything I've ever wanted? You, Mark, a baby on the way, meaningful work, genuine connection. This is more than I ever dared hope for." Rhea was quiet for a moment. Do you think we've earned it? This happiness? I think suffering isn't currency that buys happiness, Julian said thoughtfully. And I think we don't have to earn the right to joy. We just have to be brave enough to accept it when it shows up. Very philosophical. You keep saying that like it's surprising. You used to talk exclusively about molecular structures and profit margins. People change. He rolled to face her, his hand cupping her cheek. You changed me. Mark changed me. Nearly dying changed me. I spent 8 years as half a person. Now I'm whole. That tends to shift your perspective. They made love slowly, tenderly, not trying to erase the past but celebrating the present. Afterward, as Rhea slept against him, Julian stayed awake thinking about the impossibility of their journey. A year ago, he'd been bleeding and broken, convinced his one chance at happiness had died 8 years earlier. Now he had a wife, a son, a daughter on the way, work that mattered, and a life worth living. The road from there to here had been brutal, full of betrayal and loss and choices no one should have to make. But they'd survived it. More than survived. They'd transformed it into something beautiful. His phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Robert. Your father would have loved seeing you this happy. I know I do. Sleep well, nephew. Julian typed back. Thank you for never giving up on me, for showing up when it mattered, for reminding me what family means. Robert's response was immediate. That's what uncles are for. Now go to sleep. You have a pregnant wife and a teenager who needs you well rested. Sound advice. Julian set down his phone and pulled Rhea closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Mark's adolescence, Rhea's research, company decisions, probably more complications with Tori. But they'd face all of it together, as partners and parents and people who'd proven that love could survive impossible odds. The bleeding had stopped. The wounds had healed. And the life they'd built from broken pieces was more precious than anything they could have imagined in those desperate early days. Julian closed his eyes, finally at peace. Sometimes the greatest love stories weren't about perfect timing or easy paths. Sometimes they were about two people who refused to give up, who fought through separation and mistakes and devastating secrets to find their way back to each other. Have you ever gotten a second chance at something you thought was lost forever? Have you experienced love that survived despite impossible odds? Share your story in the comments. I read every one, and your experiences matter. Let me know where you're watching from, and if this story touched your heart, please subscribe. Tomorrow we'll meet another couple whose journey proves that true love always finds a way home.